Hi, everyone. Frankie here, New West Reset. How's it going, eh? And thanks for shooting in and joining me here for this one. Another chill chat here at New West Reset. And joining old Frankie here tonight is my friend OzBeast. Oz, welcome. How you doing? How's everything?
Hey, how we doing? Doing well there.
Great. Thanks for joining me here tonight. You're coming in loud and clear. Everything sounds good. So
Excellent.
welcome. Thank you very much for taking time out of your Sunday morning for you, Saturday night for me, or Saturday evening. So yeah, thanks. It's great to finally chat with you.
Oh, that's my pleasure. Looking forward to it.
So we were chatting earlier, and you were saying you were from Western Australia. You're in Perth, Australia,
Yep.
and you were talking about some of the research
Out in the
that you
desert
were
here.
doing. Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
The wow, that's the funny thing about parts of Australia is it is very much arid desert and basically uninhabited. Is that correct? Some parts.
Large parts of it, yeah.
Yeah. But it's such a, we were talking, and it's such a huge country. And you were doing research into some of the early exploration in and around the early history of Australia. And you were talking about the Dutch, and we were talking a bit about the Dutch, what were they called? The Dutch East India Trading Company?
Dutch
Is
East
that?
India Company, the
Oh,
VAC,
yeah.
yeah.
And then
Dutch East India Company. Well, it could have been the Dutch themselves.
or just the Dutch naval forces, the Dutch merchant navy kind of thing.
What, well, to explain, what we're talking about here is the possibility of Dutch presence off the coast of Western Australia, but it's a fact that they had in Indonesia, they had bases. The thing is, three wars, actually 4 wars, the Dutch Anglo Wars, through the 1600s, and but the thing is, people don't understand that the Dutch were a colony of Spain. They were ruled by the Spain up until the mid 1500s. So really, the Spanish and the Dutch history is sort of intermingled a bit as well. So it goes back even further, but that's another thing. But we were
Oh,
looking at the old maps. We were discussing the old maps. That
yeah.
going back a couple of years from autodidactic and watching a lot of what autodidactic was doing, it sort of made me want to like collect all these old maps from the David Rumsey site, which probably a lot of people know about. It's a really good site. Check it out, davidrumsey.com.
Grumsy.com. Okay,
But
thank you. Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah, and there's all
the
sorts of
Anglo
maps.
Dutch the Anglo Dutch thing could have been the British East India Trading Company versus the Dutch East India Company. But like you were saying
Yeah,
at a time,
yes,
the Dutch was a Spanish under Spanish rule, or it was a Spanish colony. But that also speaks to
a
the
little
Spanish
earlier.
American Wars prior to the American Civil War and War of Independence, which came
Yes,
after the Dutch Anglo Wars, right? So already bad blood by
exactly.
the
But at
time
that time,
the
Britain.
Spanish American War started. There was already bad blood.
Yep, yep, it goes all over. But the thing is, the British sort of the actual history is like Captain Cook came down in 1768, and like discovered parts of Australia, and then
Mhm.
the French were already down on the eastern coast. Van Diemen's Land, and the Dutch had discovered most of the eastern coast, but had not like claimed it. So when Cook came down, he was able to claim it, and then in 1788 they put a colony, and they said that the British owned Australia, but it was still on all the maps for another century known as New Holland. Everything outside the New South Wales colony was known as New Holland. That's odd.
I think I remember hearing something about that, but I can't remember where. I watch a lot of history
You'll see.
documentaries because I find it fascinating.
Yep.
I know you have to
Yep.
take a lot of it with a
Yeah,
grain of
me too.
salt, of course, but they're interesting, right?
Do you know?
So,
I'll recommend to you highly to check out the History Time YouTube channel, because it's not Mudflood related or anything like that, but they go very. It's a British guy, and he goes very in depth into um, like Viking kings and like all these sorts of things. Like the Scottish histories, and like looking at the original sources, and
mhm.
it's not documentaries, but it's a really great channel, and that's how I found autodidactic as well. But I love history, man. I love history, especially like ancient history.
Yeah, so do I. And that's why I really like. Speaking of documentaries, there's a new documentary television series that I think is on one of the streaming television platforms, Netflix, I believe, and it's Graham Hancock,
Mm-hmm.
and it's called
Okay.
Ancient
Yep.
Apocalypse. And
Yep.
I quite enjoy Graham Hancock because of his diligent research and the
Yeah.
fact that he goes
He's a great
against the
researcher.
accepted academic narrative.
See,
Yeah,
this is the
he's
thing. Yes, you can appreciate somebody's work and disagree with them on their conclusions, and still think that they're a good researcher. You don't have to
well, I
agree
think,
with everything that they say.
yeah, I agree. I would agree with you on that point. But I think a lot of what Graham is exploring in this new series um,
Mm-hmm.
speaks to a lot of what we research in our community of the reset community, the Mudflood / Tartaria / the old world,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it, right? And a lot of what they're covering
Mm.
uh, touches on a lot of what we are uncovering. Things like an
Yep.
ancient civilization that was advanced, that was somehow lost to some cataclysm in the not so distant past, and that the
Yep.
timelines have been changed, and
Mm-hmm.
things are probably older than we're told in a lot of respects. And he talks about all of that. And so I've been watching this
Yeah.
series, and it's excellent. And the last episode, he
Well.
was supposed to go to some place in the US where they have it's called Serpent Mound, and it's a huge serpent
Oh,
shaped
I,
mound.
do you know what? I've watched a 2 hour special about that particular place. That's in not Kentucky. It's just next to
It's
Idaho. Is
in
it? I can't remember, but
Omaha. No, not
um,
Omaha.
the,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
ah,
But it
I
was
can't remember.
the Midnight Ride. They're Christians, but they were comparing it to one that's in Bashan in Jordan, and it was a similar
Okay.
sort of serpent. And it was like really interesting.
Yeah, these are just ancient
But you'd find the
earthworks.
same thing in America.
Yeah, that's well, and that's the thing that we find in our community too, right? Is mud flood and old world architecture that's the same all over the world. So it's not necessarily surprising.
until
But
you
the thing
until
on
you
this
look at it
episode
from
is
above,
because
Frankie.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And the
When
thing
you
with
were
this
looking on your
episode,
live stream the other night, those rivers.
right? Yeah, where it kept changing course.
Yeah, there's like a million times. What is it, Meander River?
Yeah,
Meandering every which way.
yeah, hidden in plain sight with
Sorry,
the name
continue.
of
Yeah.
that place. Right. So I guess his reputation, Graham Hancock, has preceded him because he goes against the narrative and he challenges the establishment
Yes.
and academia. And so he was supposed to
Mm-hmm.
go to the Serpent Mound and meet with somebody from the Parks Service in the United States, in that whatever state that is, it escapes me, forgive me. But anyway, they actually closed it and they said no, and he was barred from entering, and he He wasn't permitted there. They closed the gate on him, and they wouldn't let him in. Wouldn't let him in. I'm like, wow, that
They got the memo.
that's pretty obvious. There's something that they don't want him in there poking around, right?
Yeah, something they don't want to talk about. Well, yeah, they don't like talking about the archaeological history of America. You're not allowed to go looking for things.
That's right, and that's everything that's sort of in and around the Mississippi area. There's a lot of earthworks and mounds because there were mound building civilizations there. But really, are those just earth piled
Yep.
up, or is it structure underneath too? Which a lot of cases now they're finding that it's actually stone
Yeah,
structures
I'm
underneath.
finding. I've heard stories of them finding giant skeletons inside. So, and it's like
Me
an
too.
Indian burial ground, apparently. You know, and you find old newspaper articles from the 1800s talking about it, and then you never hear about it.
Right, right. Oh, Ohio is the state. It just jumped into my head.
Yes,
Ohio.
yes, yes.
And there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in Ohio as a state, anyways. But because there's the Ohio River and the
Yes.
Mississippi River, so there's a lot of ancient history going on around there. But I like how going back to Hancock for a second, it speaks to the phrase that he uses that we're a species with amnesia, and that really
Yeah.
struck me at the beginning, and that's where I really got into his research and his work. And to this day, I still
Well, that
admire a
goes
lot of what he
into
does, and
what is
it's
it?
like an 80-20 thing.
Yeah, a lot of people were inspired by him, like David Wilcock and others. But that's the Enki and little Sumerian creation. Like they created the Adamu, the perfect worker man, and we were like that's I forgot his name, that South African guy, Michael Tellinger. He talks about that as well. The Adamu, and we were a worker, and money was introduced. Gold, looking for gold, was introduced to us as a reward, and I don't know, maybe there is something to that. Who knows? Echoed in the Bible.
It could be. I mean, I don't. Yeah, like the whole Enki and Neo thing, the whole Sumerian Anunnaki thing. I don't necessarily. I think a lot of people have misinterpreted the phrasing of those who from the stars came or whatever. They're
Yeah,
taking it too literally that these are ancient aliens, and I hate that whole ancient alien thing. It drives me bonkers because they're
but then
overcomplicating things when you can clearly see that.
if you look at
Go ahead.
away from all that, I've never been interested in aliens. But I was going to say, if you look at the actual like archaeological and when you're looking at it from that perspective, and you're looking at like the Babylonian and the Sumerian, the first finds, that they've got that's all written in Sanskrit. There was one tomb, and it was like the guy's not his tomb. It was like his personal library, and he collected everything. It was like in a whole bunch of different languages, like in stone, and they haven't even gone through all of it. They're still discovering these things or hiding a lot of it, but that's what you got to look at rather than like somebody's interpretation of it.
Yeah, and that's why I like a lot of the sort of research that we're seeing in our community is it's people are filming stuff or they're going online and they're checking out photographs or old maps or excerpts from old books, and they're basically just
Yeah,
going through it bit by bit and letting us as sort of participating observers basically as part of the community in, interpret
yeah,
it, and sort of by us commenting and sharing it, it helps to sort of collate a lot of these ideas together. So at least we can get onto a path of trying to figure out what was going on around here, kind of thing.
Well, yeah. I mean, I started off looking at like autodidactic, and then Stuff Beagle, and John Levi, and Minds Unveiled, and then Iwa, and then Streets of Tartaria, and then New West Reset, and then everyone's got their own different style of presenting things, but it's all getting information across. Like
I think that's a really good strength that it's in the favor of our communities. Some of us are like me, we do boots on the ground, or like Caleb about the streets. Some do, checking out the old photographs. Some do video essays where they do
Yeah.
research and they just sit down and they just talk about what they've discovered and what their sources were. So everybody has their area of expertise in their wheelhouse, right? So it's great because I don't know about
Yeah.
a lot of stuff, so I can check out Campbell's channel or John Levi's channel or whoever, and gain a different
Mm.
perspective on something, or gain some kind of perspective at least on something that I really have not much knowledge about, because all I know for sure is what I see around me, and even that I don't know what
That's
happened
true.
or how it necessarily happened. All I see is the end result, and it's right in front of my face, so I film it.
Exactly.
But there's people out there
Do you
that
know that?
go really deep, you know.
Sorry,
There's people out
they
there,
do.
their
Yeah,
research
that's
goes
what
really deep. Yeah.
got me started was Biggs hammered home in some of his like early episodes 2 years ago or a year and a half ago. When you see red brick and you see it going into the ground, you have to consider that you never build red brick into the foundations. Like you don't do that because it gets wet.
It's too
It's not how it's
porous.
done. So when you see red brick going into the ground, then you look down, and often you see the windows at weird levels.
Mm-hmm.
You know how you see that where there's like they're like at a half level, and the windows are
Yeah.
and they have to alter the ground around the building. Like I don't know, there's little things that just make me always look down and always question. And from seeing that, all I can say for sure is that when the building was made, the ground level is lower than what it is now. That's all I can say.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I'm seeing. And we touched on this when we were chatting earlier before we went live. And well, we're not live. This will be rebroadcast later, but you know what I mean. But I was seeing
Sure.
this on other
Yeah.
channels, like you mentioned streets,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the boots on the
Mm-hmm.
ground
Yeah, he's
style that
great.
really inspired
Yeah.
me to be like, I got to go out there, because I'm seeing what Caleb is seeing, but I'm seeing it here where I live. But I had been
Yep. Same
watching,
thing.
a lot of the same channels that you mentioned, Campbell at Autodidactic
Mm-hmm.
and Stuff Beagle and John Levi. John Levi was actually the first channel that I came across. And then from
Yeah.
him, I believe there was a couple of other channels that I checked out, and then eventually Streets of Tartaria. And that's when it hit me. I
Yeah.
was like, wait a sec, that looks exactly like the library that's 3 blocks away from where I live, that was
Yeah.
built in, 1910 or whatever, right? So then I went and had a closer look at it, and I'm like, well, hang on a second, these windows look funny, or why is there a bricked up arch that looks like a half buried arch window and
Yeah.
it's bricked up?
Yeah, they do
And
that. Yeah. You look at the
or what?
bricks and this parts of the bricks that are like new bricks. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh shit, there's an arch there.
But that's basically,
Yeah,
yeah,
Billy
the same
Philly, like
thing.
he notices those. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like Billy Philly's work too.
Yeah, yeah. That's I was just chatted with he and Nikki, his wife Nikki, Joe and Nikki, last week, um,
Oh,
for
nice, cool.
a chat just like you and I are doing now, and that's actually that'll be going up tomorrow for me, which is Sunday,
Oh,
the
yeah,
20th.
that's awesome.
So
Yep.
yeah, great chat, and yeah, I love his channel. I love what they do, and it's same thing. The brick going into the ground, that's a red flag. And
Yeah.
people say, oh, well, they used brick footings back in the day. Yeah, they used brick footings, but then they would cover it with concrete. And then once that concrete set, then they would build on top of that as a footing. But prior to them using
Yeah.
brick and concrete, or if it wasn't readily available, they would use stone. So a lot of times
Yep.
the foundation is stone, and then they build brick on top of that. But yes, you're right. The brick should be above ground because the brick is porous, and if it stays wet for too long, or like here in Canada, it gets wet, and then that water that's penetrated the brick freezes in the winter, then it expands, contracts, and over years the brick just crumbles. it
Yep.
starts to crack, and once it starts to crack,
So they
more
built it
water
like that.
gets in there,
Yep.
and it eventually just crumbles away, right? So yeah, that's a big
And
red
this
flag,
idea
and
of a
that's
crawl
what I was
space
noticing. And
makes
I've
me laugh.
often, yeah, yeah, exactly. Like a root cellar is one thing, where my granddaddy did that. They built a house on a stone foundation,
Yep.
wood frame, 2-story farmhouse out in rural Quebec outside of Montreal. And stone foundation that was maybe, I don't know, a foot high, wood frame, 2-story house on top of that. But then he and my couple of my great uncles hand dug a root cellar that just went down
Wow.
underneath maybe the rear 1/4 of the house, but they left it dirt walls and dirt floor and just put wooden stairs down there. And that's where they stored, it was a root cellar. It was like their pantry. My grandma did canning, so
Mm-hmm.
they would store all that stuff down there. And, they lived on a little
Yep.
farm, so that's what that was for. But that's different than like what you're saying is a crawl
Yeah.
space, which a lot of times I think is just a half-flooded basement to begin with.
Yeah. That's the thing. That's to raise the. You see these places often have a porch. They have stairs going up to the porch, and then halfway up, not on the ground, you see the door and the ground, and so it's quite odd that they would do
Yeah, the front door is
that.
3 feet off the ground or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I did quite a while back, about 6 months ago. Like Biggs asked me to help him out with a special project. He wanted to build a collection for Utah first to help out streets, because streets. He
Mm-hmm.
wanted to basically have. He wants to look deep into the history of like the temple and the area around the temple, and
Yeah.
so I collected about 1,500 high detail photos and sorted
Wow.
them into different types. And I colorized the best of them. They're all high detail. I'll give you the link to it later. But this is for a project for streets, so I don't really use it for myself. But in that
Yeah.
project,
Yeah.
like I had like different types of buildings. So I had like all the tall buildings, and like they had names of the newspaper buildings and whatnot, and the temple area and different churches and all this. But then they had civilian buildings, and a lot of them were named after the people that lived in all those civilian buildings. They were all like 1-story, 2-story. It's
Okay.
Utah, so they weren't like extravagant houses. But I went through it. At the end of it, I had more than 150 like individual houses, dwellings, like personal dwellings, private dwellings, and like all from 1870, 1880 through to about 1905, 1906. And
Okay.
they're all just simple dwellings. But out of those, I went to look for mudflood evidence through the collection, and I easily came up with about 70 examples of windows underground, mudflooded windows, or just suspicious porches, or like it was very, very easy to find it. I didn't have to look very hard to make a folder of just what I saw as suspicious, and I even found some suspicious manipulated photos of downtown as well. So I found that quite interesting.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the photos that were manipulated a lot more than we think. Uh,
Yeah,
and these manipulations aren't always nefarious or malicious in nature. Sometimes it's just highlighting with some white paint or darkening some shadows with some black paint or dark gray paint, just to give more of a
that's
contrast
right.
because the photo is going to become a print or a postcard
Yeah,
or something like that.
and I mean, Beats has been doing his specials lately and hammering home that yes, there was manipulations, but the intent is not always nefarious to hide something.
Hmm.
A lot of the times it was like a professional like photo studio, and they would produce postcards, for example. So
Yep.
they would cut certain parts of the buildings out and put different skies, and not just vanilla sky, but like I think that people had artistic inspiration from that, and they would do it as a personal hobby. They would like make collages of different put the building here and like, you know, make a background and swap this building for this building. I think it's totally possible and it's doable, and sometimes that's what we're looking at, you know. Maybe it's a high school project. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, and the thing is that whether you believe that the science and the tech of photography is older than what we're told it is, or whether you think, okay, no, it's, you know, 1860s ish or whatever, like they tell us, okay, close enough, that's fine. Either way,
1830,
you could tell.
1836.
Oh, 1830s, okay. But either way, you can tell that there were tons of different attitudes towards photography. There was the very serious photographers that would do landscape photos or
Yep.
portraits or whatever. But then people had fun with it, right? Do those goofy things where they would sever the head on the negative and put it in the lap and make ghosts
and they're juggling their heads.
Yeah, they were having fun with
just
it.
Like with the video. Big showed some early video footage in some of his like music videos, and it was like the dwarf and the giant, and it was 1901, and it was just video editing, and it was a guy who was like just changing size, and it was just amazing. I can't remember the name of the video exactly, but they were playing around with that stuff as soon as it came out, you know, like they don't do that anymore.
Yeah. And whether it was as soon as it came out, you know, in the 40s and 50s and 60s when they were messing around with it, or whether it was a pre-existing tech that had been since rediscovered around that same time, it doesn't matter. Like you said, they were kind of having fun with it and messing around with it, because whether it was new or just new to them, it was still kind of a novel thing.
Yeah, like the Charlie Chaplin. There's one of the long videos, Charlie Chaplin videos, and it's you know, he's got like chimps playing baseball. You know,
yeah,
riding a horse.
Sure, why not? Hey, if a guy can get a monkey on a horse, that's just good fun. I don't care who you are.
Yeah,
if you don't like watching chimps riding horses, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, Oz, how did you?
Yeah, too many people are too serious these days.
Yeah, you got that right.
Sorry, go
so
ahead.
How did you get into this whole thing? I mean, apart from obviously your interests in history, which we discussed here a bit, but is that sort of like, what was it? You've always been into history. Some of the narratives kind of didn't make sense, and that's what kind of brought you to where you are now.
Always been in the alternate sort of history possibilities, but like I said, staying away from aliens and whatnot. But you know, like things like Jesuits and all that. You know, like I've looked a lot into Crusades and Templars and pirates. You know, Columbus didn't discover America and all this sort of. I've got a lot of books about that sort of thing, and you know, that's where I was for a long time. And then I was working full time as a storeman for a while, and then I took a break. I decided I wanted to take a break when the you know, the pandemic hit.
Right.
I was like, okay, I was good. Yeah. So I did that for 6 months, and then wanted to get back to work, and then they tried to make me wear a mask. So I was like, not working. I'll just wait till it all goes away. So I had a lot of time on my hands, you know, and so I wasn't really doing anything. I just watching autodidactics videos, and started doing my own research, you know, like building my own archives of things. And I did do some boots on the ground. Like at one point, things Biggs was saying about viaducts and, you know, the pavement lights, and, you know, and just my own questions, because I remember back in would have been 94 or 95, back in high school, like my history teacher made us go take photos, like sort of mixed in with our photography class, and we had like over weeks, and we had to like photograph all the old buildings around our city, you know, in teams. And
that's a cool project.
Most of those buildings aren't there anymore. Yeah, it was great. But you know, and then we went into the darkroom and had to develop our own photos, and a lot of people weren't interested. They just saw it as a time off. But I thought it was really interesting. But then when started thinking about doing boots on the ground, and I was like thinking back to that time, and like a lot of those buildings are just not there anymore. It's just not recognizable as what it is. And I mean, I have footage of now of Perth in from 1910, from 1980, tourism videos in the 50s, 60s. 1990, I have footage of like just the city, and even that doesn't look anything like it does now. So you got to ask questions, you know. It doesn't all add up. It doesn't add up.
Yeah, I agree. And that's kind of the same thing here. Calgary is a pretty, I guess it's a pretty big city, not so much by, let's say, North American standards, but by Canadian standards, it's a pretty big city. We're
Oh yeah, I saw some three-story,
almost around 1.8 million. What's that? Sorry.
I said I saw some three-story buildings there.
Well, yeah. Wow. Right. But it's a pretty good sized city. But the problem is that it's kind of a boom town. It's kind of almost from its inception has always been a boom town of sorts. Because just in rapid succession, there's been a lot of stuff that's happened in the last 150 years or so. First, there's a lot of cattle ranches here, and they were practically giving away the land. It wasn't those free land grabs like they had in the States, but you could buy land really cheap out here for grazed land for cattle or whatever. So there was that boom, and then the railway came in, and that helped to boost the economy. And then they discovered oil not too far away in the 20s, actually in the teens and in the 20s.
Yeah.
So that created another boom. And then, of course, Canada, much like where you are in Australia, we were a British colony at the time as well, or part of the Commonwealth, sorry. So during World War II, Canada was involved as soon as the UK was involved. Canada was involved in the war, and Newfoundland, because Newfoundland wasn't even part of Canada.
But the colonials do the fighting, eh?
Yet. So after, right, exactly. So after World War II, we had another boom. So Calgary's always been boom, boom, boom. So, and oil now is the biggest economy, followed closely second by cattle still. We're a big cow town here.
Yeah.
So as a result, they're same thing.
Oh, I was going to mention
talking about. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, for Perth, one thing that I found interesting, and I think most people find interesting, is that the convicts. Everyone knows that we established the city like Australia with convict labor, right? Now,
that's what they
not
say.
Many people understand that they do that. Not many people understand that Western Australia was established as a colony, free from convicts. We didn't have convict labor here, but they had apprentices. And I was reading up on like the letters to Captain James Sterling, who discovered this, he became the governor of the Swan River colony in 1829. He came here, right? And there was a couple of ships. The other one was Charles Fremantle was behind him, and Fremantle was named after him. And then there was John Septimus Roe, who was the surveyor. And all these are famous people. There's like schools and museums and things named after them, in Perth. But reading the letters to, of
course,
James Sterling from the Admiralty, that I found that really interesting. I found a bunch of letters, and the very, very first thing he did when he landed, and they decided to put before the colony was even founded, he instituted rules for how the settlers would take the apprentices, and basically it's not the orphan trains, but the orphan ships. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And and for the treatment of them, and like how they would be. It was basically slavery. It was not so much convicts as just slave workers, juvenile slave workers. And the very first acts instituted by the governor were that. I find that
wow.
Really.
So it's basically,
and I found the same thing worldwide, looking into like some of the other places. yeah, looking into like the orphan trains in some of the states in America, you know, like our and the government
Hmm.
acts that were signed to cover that, you know, and the timing of it is pretty much the same worldwide, you know, like I don't know, all just another piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, they had kids working in factories in the Industrial Revolution in Britain, here in Canada, in the U.S., and they're called first original early colonies. Yeah, yeah, it was pretty right up and through into the Victorian era,
Yeah,
and even after, I think slightly
yeah,
after the
and some of
Victorian
the
era, there was still
machinery.
child labor.
Yeah, and even Mind Unveiled in some of his early work about the Irish, he talks about the Irish, and through the 1600s and the 1700s, they were just viewed as like slaves, absolute slaves. Like they would just use the slave as a contract, they'd be on a lifelong contract, and they'd just be sold the whole village, you know, and
Jesus,
just like
yeah,
around the world. You know, that's yeah, and the Admiralty was like deep into this, you know. Yeah, and that's at the time when they're just like deporting people for, you know, a loaf of bread, stealing a loaf of bread. So, and you know, my ancestry is Irish,
wow,
so
okay.
it interests me to know how badly the Irish were treated, you know. But like that, there was a big Irish presence in early America as well, you know. Did they all come there willingly?
Yeah, that's right. The Irish were not welcomed with open arms when they first started arriving in the United States. In fact, even when JFK, John Kennedy, was elected as president, there were still grumblings that he was of Irish descent, and people weren't too happy about having a Catholic Irishman in the White House, right? It's kind
Yeah,
of,
look how that
you
turned
know,
out.
right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's 100 years after, more than 100 years after the initial grumblings of the waves of Irish that came into the U.S. As they were mistreated, they couldn't vote, and they were basically serfs, and it was, yeah, they weren't even considered.
Look,
They were basically
the
akin
Irish.
to like goblins. Irish were like goblins to the
Yeah,
Americans. Very
rough
strange
ones,
attitude.
to be sure.
It's
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah, these things just make you think, you know.
Yeah, well, and that's the great thing about, because you're talking about history, and I've kind of, again, going back to that a little bit, I've always been interested in, ancient history, if not for anything else, that it's just fascinating stories, whether the narrative has been constructed or whatever, and however much you can, again,
Mm.
take with a grain of salt, but it's still very, very interesting, and sometimes
Yeah,
almost
I mean,
comical,
uh,
because you look into
every,
stuff and you start seeing a lot of the same players, a lot of the same names popping up, or a lot of the same agendas,
yeah,
or a lot of the same MOs, modus operandi, being used.
yeah,
I
and
was talking about the
Andrew
early
Carnegie,
history.
you know, the library,
Yeah, I was talking about the early history of Calgary, and the boom town and this and that, and sort of the early history of Calgary with the oil boom. You can compare to early San Francisco with their gold rush, because the gold wasn't discovered anywhere near San Francisco
and
itself. It was like more than 100 miles away. Same with the oil in Calgary. It was like 50
yeah,
miles
and what
away from Calgary.
that's right, and what's with the 16 sand quarries that you were talking about the other day? What the hell? Why do they need so much
That's what I want to know. Like, that's a lot of sand quarries.
sandstone?
For sandstone to build new construction and rebuild what was burnt down supposedly in the Great Fire. 16 quarries in a city of 4 to 5,000 people. Uh,
So did they have the infrastructure to build
Even
bricks
10,000
out
people,
of
around 1900.
all that? Yeah,
Well,
it's
I'm
just
looking
not.
into
That's the
that
thing. Like
with Bernie
it
right
accounts for the
now.
bricks, but like
It accounts for the sandstone
yeah, but
blocks,
it
but
accounts for the
it
bricks, but
doesn't
there's just not
account
enough
for the
people.
red brick. It doesn't even account for the
It
brick.
doesn't account for
Bernie and
the
I are
demand for it. There's no need for it.
Bernie and I are looking into, supposedly there used to be a red brick factory here in Calgary that no longer exists, but there's not even a trace of it. But the spot that it's supposed to be at, Bernie and I are going to go get together and check it out because
Oh,
he lives here in
cool.
Calgary and he lives very close to where I am. And we've always questioned how could they
Oh yeah.
build so many buildings out of brick in the late 1890s, early 1900s in Calgary if there was no brick factory here.
Yeah. Not to mention, how did poor Fred handle all that work?
Right. Well, and like you said too, the people, right? Like if it's a
Because
city of
it wasn't the
10,000,
railway. They say it wasn't the railway.
well, the railway didn't come in here until 1886. So any building that was built of brick prior to that, how did the brick get here? It would have had to have been by horse and wagon.
Yeah.
So there you go. That's a lot of work. But like I said, the sandstone quarries account for the sandstone for the foundations of the buildings and the window trim that they use sandstone out of, and a lot of the buildings themselves are built out of sandstone. But there's just as many that are built out of red brick. And if you have a city of 10,000 people, okay, maybe you have enough men, skilled and unskilled laborers combined, that can build a 3 or 4 or 5-story building out of brick and stone. But when you're building dozens of buildings at the same time, there's just not enough people.
Yeah.
So then they throw in the narrative, oh, well, they had to bring
Yeah.
stone cutters in from Winnipeg. Okay. So that would have taken about a week by railway. And then where would they have lived? Would they have just lived in a tent city, or like how the hell would
Yeah.
they accommodate all of these extra workers coming in?
Exactly. That's it. Do you know when I was like helping Biggs out every week, we'd start doing the Google Maps and do a Google drop. Yeah, and so like when early on there wasn't people in the chat that were responding with cities like appropriately at the time, so I'd have to keep a list, of backup cities to look into, and so I'd also do a bit of research into these cities, and after a while I started, like I looked at a lot of different cities. I was looking into the Wikipedia pages and just sort of get a feel for it, and you really do see the same things over and over and over. The architect was just one person that built all the bloody buildings, and there was a great fire. It's just, with variations, of course, and some places are older than others. And, like I said, I made a comment the other day in your video where you mentioned about the Louisiana Purchase, and how, like, I remember showing Biggs, like when I first started chatting with him, like a map of New Francia, which was basically the French possessions in the United States, before they were ceded to Mexico.
Yeah.
And it's massive. It's like huge. And you got to include Canada, most of Canada in that as well. And people don't even know that, so that for a long time that was either under Spanish or French control, or even Russian in some parts of the West.
Yeah, well, and Canada, before it was a country, before it was even part of the British Commonwealth, was called Rupert's Land.
Yeah.
Named after Prince Rupert of damn it, I can't remember. Not England. Prince Rupert of. Anyways,
Sounds German.
It's not super important. But anyway, and then what happened was basically.
Yeah, actually, I was helping JJ. Like, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, JJ.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, like, she was trying to find in Alaska. We were looking for the original capital, because the capital that's there doesn't look like the rest of the capitals in America. Like, it's not the proper style of capital for the original Russian capital. Oh God, I can't remember the names. There was a couple of different names of the town, and then it sort of goes into like it's not an important town anymore, and like if you go further back and all the names are different, and you look at different countries' maps, and it's just interesting. We never did quite. Probably need to continue on, but yeah, and I looked into like earlier documentaries showing like Russian presences, like down the west coast, like trading with the Spanish, you know, in California,
Right.
which I found quite interesting. And yeah, people don't
Yeah,
realize
because
there's such a
basically Canada,
diverse, like influence.
uh-huh. Yeah, well, that's the thing is that even in Canada, like Rupert's Land was basically like just open, like it was just it wasn't claimed or owned by anybody. It was just named for Prince Rupert of the Rhineland. That's who it was. I just had to look it up here. But basically, the whole area that was formerly known as Rupert's Land ended up being they chartered it to the Hudson's Bay Company, which basically Hudson's Bay
Yeah.
Company was like the British East India Trading Company or the Dutch East India Company, same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And
big.
so their business was the fur trade.
Corporation.
So parts of Canada that were not Rupert's Land were owned by the French, which is now like Quebec and parts of Ontario around the Great Lakes and stuff. And then the other part of it was part of the Louisiana Territory, a little bit in southern Alberta. And then parts of British Columbia were part of the Oregon Territory. And then the rest of it was basically unclaimed. And then in 1867, all of a sudden, the British Crown just supposedly purchased the land from the Hudson's Bay Company, which is weird because the Hudson's Bay Company didn't own it. It was chartered to them by King Charles on behalf of Prince Rupert. So I don't know. It's really crazy. And then we just became a country in 1867. Poof, just like that. And they changed the name to Canada.
With the K.
Well, there's Kanata, which is Kanata, and that's that's a native Canadian word, and that's supposedly where they got the name Canada from.
Yeah.
I should look into that though, because I don't know how much truth there is to that. I don't know. I've never looked into it.
But yeah, I did hear that Manitoba was supposed to be the 14th colony in the American Revolution.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was Quebec.
Well, and at one time, parts of Vermont and Maine, and one other state, I think maybe Upper New York, actually were part of Canada. And then the War of 1812, a whole bunch of stuff. The borders got established, right? So, yeah.
Crazy Canucks came down and burnt down the White House.
Yeah, we burnt down the presidential palace, and that's when they renovated it. They painted it.
The War of 1812? The War of 1812, right? It was the only. It's named after 1 year, but it lasted for 3 years. All right.
Yeah, that's dumb. Right?
The final battle was fought after the World War ended.
Yeah, that's right. Because there was that one general that didn't want to give up or something. So he was like, "Oh, we have, 12 hours until the next armistice or whatever." So he kept fighting or something.
Yeah. Well, communications weren't really that.
There's a story like that happens in every war. World War I, there's a story like that too.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I guess. Yeah, that's true.
I don't know if you ever seen. Did you ever watch Gallipoli? Gallipoli? Have you ever seen that movie?
Yes. Long time
yeah,
ago, but yes.
Mel Gibson. It's like one of his early movies. Yep. It's about like World War I, and it's an Australian. Like this is supposedly our most triumphant battle where we ran away. Well, we didn't run away, right? We held our ground and we were ordered by the British, but we didn't lose a man in the retreat. We were ingenious and set up like guns to automatically fire and trick the Turks into thinking that we were there when we weren't. So it was a successful retreat. But this movie was about how they charged into battle and like all the different regiments from the different states they had to synchronize their watches, and Mel Gibson was the runner, and he was the backup runner, I think, and his mate was going into line, and he was gonna charge, and they synchronized their watches the wrong. So they went in one by one after the artillery barrage, and then they just got mown down by the machine gun. And then they're like, "No, orders is orders. Just Tasmania go in. Oh, the Victorians, boom, boom, boom," and they just all got mown down. And Mel Gibson's like, "No, I was running to give the message to the other guy." Oh, it's a great movie. Great movie.
That's the other thing too, is I like old history and stuff, but I also like war movies. Not so much because of the violence, but I guess because of in relation to history as well. The older the war, or the further in the past, the better. Like anything that's sort of World War II or earlier, I kind of
like
those movies too.
Patton, that's a great movie. And also the Big Red One, that's Luke Skywalker, the guy who did that. That's his World War II version of the movie. It's called The Big Red One. Great movie.
What's it called?
The Big Red One. It's like the first division of the army. It's like the first. So it's the Big Red One.
Oh, I've never heard of that
really
one. I'll have to check that out. Okay.
Yeah, Mark Hamill, you know, like Luke Skywalker.
He's in that. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What was one that I watched just recently was a remake of All Quiet on the Western Front.
Yeah, my friend was going on about that, but then I was like, "Oh, dude, I have that in black and white. I have it in color. I have the book that I read when I was in high school, and you're just telling me about this now? Like, come on, man, because it's in Hollywood now." It's not bad
though. It's actually pretty good, because I've seen the original and I've read the book as well. I still have a paperback copy of that book. I quite like the book, but you know, some remakes, they can really shit the bed, but this one was actually quite good.
Okay, I'll have to check it out.
So you were talking earlier about doing a lot of research and helping Biggs out with that sort of thing, and that's been kind of we were talking also about people's area of expertise and wheelhouse and experience with this kind of research, and that's kind of what you've been doing a lot of. If really, like, you do have a channel, but you're kind of a behind the scenes research guy, for the most part, right? I mean, you really like to dive into this stuff and really explore and scrutinize, right?
Well, I got into this basically to help Biggs. I was just helping Biggs with the Mudflood Club and with Caleb. You know, Caleb Wilkinson. He's out in Alice Springs there.
Yes, Caleb, yeah.
And he's we were making the animation, if you remember the Mudflood animation theory.
Yes.
About the rail animation and cloudbusters and stuff. I was just doing it to sort of help him out, you know, and I was doing pavement light. I was popularizing the old photos for him, just demonstrating, just helping out with like little art projects and stuff like that. It's just to help out, you know, and turned into helping out each week on the show, and became what it was, and it was just enjoyable, you know. Like, Biggs really needed a hand to sort of just be another set of hands and another set of eyes, you know, like just keep an eye on the chat and just keep the show rolling smoothly, you know. I didn't really want to be in the limelight or anything. I just wanted to help out my mate and just keep it going, you know.
Yeah, like a producer sort of thing, like a behind the scenes producer. Or
for me, it was just something new and interesting and challenging, and I wasn't really doing anything, and just like looking into research as well, just to help out. And you know, Biggs doesn't want to tell me what to do. I'm just got to be a bit proactive and look into things myself. I've always got my own little side projects, things that I'm interested in, you know. But Biggs taught me a lot of techniques and like how.
Well, I was just gonna say, and that you find it interesting anyway, so it's a win-win, right?
Yeah. I mean, when he ventured into the he did like his Australian shows a couple of months ago now. He had more success than what I ever did, because I still can't find very much in my city, but I can find stuff in the eastern states. But like, he was finding it like pretty much live on camera straight away, just digging into the best archives, and like, he really knows how to do proper research. Put me to shame, but you know, I got my archives that I built up, and
Well, he's been at it for quite a while too, right? And that's kind of the thing that I was talking about with Joe from Billy Philly 22 last weekend was, we're all still learning. And,
Mm.
he made a conscious effort to do a little bit more research before he actually goes out and hits a spot. Rather than just sort of a cursory glance, he kind of does a little bit of a deeper dive and then he goes out and hits the spot. So he's still doing a boots
Yeah,
on
well,
the ground.
you got to know what you're looking at, right?
Yeah. Whereas I wasn't born and raised in Calgary, but I'm 52, so I've lived here for 42 years. I only lived in Montreal the
Yeah,
first 10 years of my life.
yeah.
So I'm very
So you can
familiar with,
remember things being a little different.
yeah, and I'm very familiar with the city and the sort of the narrative of the history.
Mm.
So, and again, because I find history interesting anyways. So, just when we moved here, my dad got a job here, which is why we moved out here. And my dad moved out a couple of months before the rest of the family moved out, and he was out here for about a month, and then he came back to Montreal, and then we all came out together again as a family 2 months later. Like packed up the house, sold the house, and off we went. And we actually
Yeah,
drove across Canada when we moved. We pulled a camping trailer, like I don't know, some people call it a caravan camping
yeah.
trailer. And
Caravan.
we kind of made a family road trip out of it and stayed overnight at campgrounds and stopped and checked out roadside attractions or sites or whatever, and got to know the country pretty well pretty much almost from coast to coast.
Mm.
And so when we first got to Calgary, my dad already had learned a lot about the city just in the couple of months that he'd been here, just asking around and talking to locals and talking to his new coworkers and stuff. And that kind of rubbed off on me, and I just kind of ran with it. And being from Montreal and moving to Calgary, Calgary was very much like a cowboy city, kind of like Dallas, Texas, or Houston,
Yeah,
Texas, really, that kind of thing. And I didn't know that as a kid living in Montreal until we got
yeah.
here. My dad told me, okay, it's like they have like real cowboys out there, son. And so in my mind, as a 10-year-old, I was picturing like a Western movie with like tumbleweeds blowing down the street and people dressed like cowboys and all that. And obviously, it's a modern city when we got here, and I was kind of bummed out. But I was really fascinated by that whole cowboy narrative, and that's what really got me looking into just the history of the city in general. And that's how I found out, when the railroad came in and this and that. And just over the years, I've been
Yeah,
pretty familiar with a lot of the narrative. So when I go to hit a building that I know very well, I don't really need to research it too much. But my problem is that um, I find a lot of stuff
yeah.
just randomly. I'll be walking out around somewhere, running errands or going to the bank or walking to and from work.
Mm.
And I purposely take different streets walking to and from work or if I'm going somewhere. And I'll just randomly stumble across a building that I didn't know was there. So I'll shoot a video for it. And then I have to do the research after the fact when I get home. So sometimes some of my
Ah,
videos will have,
yeah,
some of my videos will have text on the bottom in the video saying, "Oh, actually, this building was built in yada yada, whatever, whatever," right? Because I wasn't sure when I was filming.
afterthoughts.
Yeah. So I mean, there's always room for improvement, but it's kind of hard in that respect. When I just stumble across a building and I just pull my
Yeah,
phone out of my pocket and start filming.
yeah. Well, I mean,
What
I've
is that
thought
crazy
about
noise in the
doing boots on
background?
the ground myself. For that, it's just crows, magpies.
Oh, they're
Really,
birds. Oh, magpies. Okay.
there's a lot of them around.
I keep forgetting it's daytime there for you. It's like coming up on noon, I think, for you, right?
Yeah, yeah. Not too late. It- Sorry, where were we?
So sorry, I interrupted you. You were saying I interrupted you. You were starting to say you had done some boots on the ground.
Oh, yeah. A while ago, when I first got into pigs, I thought about doing it myself. I was really actually like watching streets and your stuff sort of got me I know that there's stuff here in my city that is similar, and I wanted to document it, but I don't know. It just I started doing the live show and just helping out and doing other things. I never really got around to it, but I could get to it in the future. I did get some photos of like the last pavement light, and I learned a lot about the layout of the city. When Campbell and Biggs did like one of their shows recently, like they wanted to have a good look at Perth to understand the mud flow in Perth,
Mm-hmm.
and how
Right.
looking at Google Earth in 3D to and Biggs, like he was at the point where he was doing viaducts and looking for viaducts, but not so much in Perth. I'm not too sure about that, but it's definitely Mudflood, and he figured out the hill, looking at the city, which area it would be, and it's pretty much the hill that I live on, like my whole suburb and like 2 other suburbs on that hill. So it's kind of like I really should go do some boots on the ground, like, and start just documenting maybe a journey from the top of the hill down to the city, because you can see the city from where I am, and it's on an angle. There's a lot of
Yeah.
weird things about it that I'd like to like point out on camera, but it's a lot of time and effort as well, and I've got to work now, so we'll see. One day in the future, I'll get around to it, but it is something that needs to be shown, and
Yeah.
that's why I like what you do.
That's
It's documenting it.
That's the thing. If it's, oh, thank you, thanks. Well, that's the thing. If it's always in the back of your mind, eventually it's going to motivate you to do it, because it's just going to eat away at you, right? So you'll be out there. You'll be out there, yeah, for sure. And you were talking about.
I've got a lot of projects that I've been
You
working
sound
on
like
for
you have a.
10 years. Like you come back to it, you do a bit for a while, and then you get bored of it and go on to something else, and then you come back to it. And these things eventually they'll get done.
Well, I find that when you take a break from something and return to it, you come back kind of reinvigorated and with a sort of a fresh new perspective on.
Yeah. Sometimes when you're frustrated, the best thing is to just walk away.
Yeah,
Do something
exactly.
else.
Yeah, you were talking about trying to get a look around the city at the hills. I want to try to do something like that here for Calgary, because I talked about that on my last stream. Was Calgary's in kind of a bowl, and all of the older parts of town that I've hit with my boots on the ground videos are at the bottoms or at the bases of these hilly areas in the city. Parts of the city that were developed on top of the hills or out in the flat areas. Those are newer,
but not massive hills.
From, no, these are just sort of maybe. Well, they're sort of the rolling foothills that lead up into the Rocky Mountains. So some of them are, 50 feet high, but they're very smooth, gradual hills that have a sort of a wide circumference at the base, right? It's not like a funny sort of a suddenly bumped up out of the middle of nowhere hill in the middle of a flatland, right? There's sort of a lot of rolling hills as you come into Calgary, but you have to descend into the city of Calgary itself from all of the compass points, if you will, north, south, east, and west.
Yeah.
And so I want to try to sort of get out there and maybe shoot and edit it as one video, but show, okay, to the north, you have to go uphill. And right at the bottom of this hill is an old neighborhood. And look at there's some mud flooded houses. And then go to the east and say, okay, again, from the east, you got to go uphill to get out of the city. And this is another old area of the city. And you know what I mean? And put it all together to kind of illustrate, because it's very hard to kind of
that's it.
To show what I'm talking
when you
about.
Can point out the pattern. Yeah, you're showing the pattern of how it's here, and look, it's here. And so logically, using logic, we could assume that over here as well, but not over here,
Yeah, all the neighborhoods that they say were built between sort of 1870s and about 1905. A lot of those still have a lot of old world buildings, and I can see a lot of evidence of mud flood. But then, the neighborhoods that were built in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, I don't see any of that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Do you know, it's been
parts of the city,
me lately.
And then as you get further out, you get that urban sprawl in the suburbs.
Yeah.
What's that?
But yeah, like I ride my push bike to work and just across a couple of suburbs.
Uh-huh.
But I've noticed lately, like pretty much I'm at the top of the hill, like I was saying, and riding across, further across, like not downhill, but just further across. And it's like some richer suburbs, like but with older Italian or Greek style houses, all got balconies. Every one of them balconies. Some of them have got marble columns, 2 marble columns, 3, 4 marble columns, Tartarian lines on the front. Some of them even have like tiling, like mosaics and
Yeah.
stuff like that. The Greek balconies with the I don't know what they're called, but anyway, yeah. And I've noticed that some of them have got 2 Greek balconies with the arches and everything, but the second balcony is at ground level, and it's really annoying me because there's about 30 houses that are, like all slightly different, but they've all got the arches, they've all got the balconies, and they've all got like that sort of feel to it. And yeah, I can't figure it out.
Yeah, it's got that old world look to it, but it doesn't look quite right for some reason.
Yeah, like the thing that, because a lot of it is sort of descending slightly over the length of the road. So you'll have some buildings, like newer buildings, some have been knocked down, and there's a newer one that's been built, in the last 40 years, 20 years or something. And so they put their windows at a certain level and their door at a certain level, and quite often it's halfway to what the next one was. But from the street level, those houses go down, like they have to go down a ramp sort of driveway down to get down to their level, and then the house next door is sort of at street level. You know what I'm saying? As it's very
Oh,
much
so it's all
happening.
so it's kind of up and down, depending when the house was built. So it's all kind of higgledy piggledy kind
Exactly,
of.
yeah. Like the majority of them are older, but you see like the newer houses, and they're all trying to be at the street level, and whereas the others aren't, and it's yeah,
You know what
just
I
another one of those
found
things.
when I first started doing this? There was something to me that was a hindrance at first, but now I found it to be quite a bit of a help. Is that we have in the older neighborhoods here in Calgary, and there's five or six that are considered historical neighborhoods, and there's another 5 or 6 that are still quite old, like pre 1920s. But all of these
Yeah.
neighborhoods have what they call architectural restrictions, meaning that if you build a new building in one of these neighborhoods, there's a certain percentage of that building that has to fit in with the older buildings in the neighborhood.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily have to have a lot of the same lines and arched windows and that sort of thing. But if 90% of the buildings are brick, your house should be brick. Or
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
90% of the buildings have this and that sort of detail to it, then they want you to have this or that sort of detail to it. So at first, some of these were
Yeah. They,
so
they
well
should make some
done.
attempt to make it fit in. Yeah.
Yeah. And at first, I was noticing these, and they were so well done that a couple of times I was almost fooled that it was an old world building that was really well maintained until I got up close, and nope,
Yeah.
nope, this is a building that was built in the 90s or in the 2000s, and it was part of that architectural
Yeah.
restrictions where they had to get it to fit in as best they could. But
Yeah.
now those buildings stick out like a sore thumb, and it helps me to identify the older buildings,
Yeah.
if you
That's
understand
true.
what I'm saying.
Yeah, and like you say, like you got to go into the alleyways, look to the side of when
Yeah,
there's
oh
a lot of
yeah.
buildings, you can see the side. They didn't paint the side, and you can see the old brickwork. And oh, geez, you can't see that from the front. It doesn't look like a brick building.
I see that a
but
lot on the old
the,
houses, even just the old houses here
yeah,
in my neighborhood, where the front of the house and the sides of the house, and we're talking big, huge 2-story homes here, the fronts and the sides,
mm-hmm.
and they're all built like Georgian or Edwardian or Victorian style, right? All that crap narrative. But anyway, the fronts and the sides have beautiful wooden shingles or wooden siding, and they're painted lovely period correct, or what we're told are period correct colors. But then you get around into the back alley, and they didn't bother covering up the house with the wooden siding or shingles in the back, and it's brick.
Yeah.
The house is brick. I see that very often here.
Yeah.
And it used to surprise me, but now it really doesn't surprise me. The only part of it that surprises
Yeah.
me
Oh,
is oh, I never knew that house was brick also. You know.
yeah. I grew up over in Melbourne, over the other side of the country when I was a kid, in like a couple of small towns, and like we had this like a house. We had 3 fireplaces in the house. It was a Victorian house, we were told, with weatherboard, but and there's a bungalow with a crawl space under it as well. But I wonder whether that was a brick house. I wonder under the weatherboard, was it all brick? I don't know.
It
It
could
just
be.
did, yeah, because it's pretty sturdy, and also the doorways were very low, but the roofs were extremely high, and I could never figure that. And a fireplace in the bedrooms.
I rented a 2-bedroom apartment back about 10 years ago that was supposed to have been built in 1917 or something like that, give or take a year or two. But anyways, before 1920, after
Yeah,
1915, before 1920, somewhere in there. But anyways, this was just a 2-bedroom apartment. It wasn't a freestanding home or a fancy brand new condo. This was an old building. It had a fireplace in the living room and it had a fireplace in the master bedroom. They had
crazy.
since been converted to natural gas, but there was chimneys all over the top of this building. So at one point, I
Yeah,
suspect they were wood burning fireplaces, and they were just converted to cleaner natural gas, probably in the 1930s or something. You know.
yeah, and we had a wood stove as well. That was great.
Oh, those are great to cook on once you get the hang of how to use them.
Yeah,
I was
great.
I was talking to you earlier about my granddad and my great uncles building the farmhouse and then digging the root cellar.
Yep.
They
Yeah, yeah,
actually
yeah.
they actually had a wood burning fireplace in the kitchen, and my grandmom used to cook for the whole family. That was 7 kids, and then herself and my granddaddy. She used to cook meals on that
Yep.
thing and bake bread and bake pies and stuff. And plus, it actually heated the whole house. The same wood burning
Yeah.
stove heated the whole house. The first floor, which had the kitchen,
Yep.
living room, and master bedroom, and then upstairs had 3 bedrooms and a bathroom.
Yeah.
2 kids to a
And you know,
room.
it costs nothing. Oh, wow. Do you know, I
Yeah.
had some friends when I was a kid, and it was a Catholic family, and they had 17 kids at the end of it.
Wow.
Some of those kids, like when the youngest were growing up, their oldest were like having their own kids. It was a very confusing family, but they
Yeah.
had like a really old house, and it was like, I don't know, it was like 2 buildings. Like one was like almost like a little chapel or something that it used to be or something. It was sort of connected. There was a courtyard and there was a tunnel underneath that connected it. Like one of what the main building had like a cellar, and it was like a big cellar. It was like the size of like a house, you know, like it's a whole story underneath, and then you could go on the tunnel into the next building. You know, it was great as a kid.
That's weird, though, isn't it?
Intriguing. Yeah,
Yeah. Now, I could
it
sort
was
of
literally used
understand.
as a cellar that they were.
Okay. Huh.
Sorry.
Yeah, I could sort of understand back when my grandparents were having kids and you know they were farmers that you kind of had a lot of kids back then because you know it was just the times you lived in and extra hands on the farm if you had
Yeah.
a lot of kids that lived healthy enough to get into where they were old enough to help on the farm and depending what religion you were, like Catholic or whatever too, right? You might have a lot of kids. But to hear about families in modern times having lots of kids like that, especially 17, like that's a lot of kids.
Yeah, that was the 80s.
That's
That Catholics.
even for them, that's a lot.
Yeah, It's huge.
Like a lot of people just aren't having children anymore. Not as a cohesive family unit, anyways.
Yeah, the
There's always these
world's
one-offs that have,
sort of going downhill these
you know,
days, isn't it?
the odd kid or whatever. But yeah, you don't often hear about, you
The
know,
trajectory is not looking as great.
you don't often hear about families having 3, 4, 5 kids anymore. I mean, obviously, the cost of living and raising kids, it's expensive, and a lot of people perhaps don't want to bring kids into a world that we live in right now. But that being said, 17 is a lot of kids. Wow. I could see how a guy would get confused
Yeah.
at family reunions.
Yeah, it is a big family.
Well, even with me, like my oldest uncle is 88 years old, and my youngest uncle is 60. So almost 30 years difference between, and they're siblings. Like my grandmom's oldest and my
Yeah.
grandmom's youngest. She had my
Yeah.
youngest uncle when she was, I think, like 48 years old. She had him.
It's odd. Yeah, I've
Right?
got a friend, and he was, his dad was almost 60. His mum was like, 40s or like 40 or like 30s. But yeah, it's just like the difference,
I consider myself pretty lucky that my parents had me when they were young. Like they got married when they were 21, and mom had me when she
Yeah.
was 23. So I had young parents. So they were very active
Yeah.
and very,
Still full of
you know,
life.
they had a lot of, yeah, had a lot of vitality. My dad would roughhouse with us kids and play with us. And I mean, I know he was tired as hell from working his ass off all day, but at that age, he still had energy to play with us. And on weekends, he would take us out camping or whatever. And if he had been considerably older, perhaps the mind would be willing, but the body would be weak in terms of just having the energy level to keep up with a bunch of little kids when you're near, let's say, your 40s or 50s, you know? Not always, but in a lot of cases, right? So I'm pretty lucky in that respect that all of us kids,
Yeah.
our parents were pretty young in my family, young enough, like old enough to be responsible, but young enough to kind of still be energetic.
Yeah. Live a long, happy life,
I
Got the
think
world
that
ahead of them.
some of that's what gave me my sense of adventure and curiosity and wanting to check out this stuff, this history, this false narrative we've been given is, you know, this natural curiosity through just a sense of adventure.
Yeah, I mean, some people are inclined to just question things. I've often wondered where it came from for me. I don't know. I'm not really
I've
rebellious, but more I just want to know. I just
I've
like
always been an
it
outdoorsy
annoys me.
kid, you know, hiking, camping. I've never really been, yeah, yeah. You just want to know, otherwise it's going to keep you up at night, right?
Yeah,
But I've never been much of a organized sports kind of guy. I mean, hockey, of course, because I'm Canadian, eh? But you know, other
yeah.
sports,
Well,
not so much. I've always been more of an outdoor sports guy. You know, hiking, fishing, hunting, and I love
yeah,
camping and that sort of thing. So that kind of, I guess, part of is that sense of adventure. And I've always just liked old stuff too. I like old cars, old
yeah,
buildings. I've always found old buildings more attractive, more interesting. Even as a kid, we used to go
yeah.
to old Montreal when I was a kid, just for day trips as a family. And I mean, there's parts of old Montreal that are the buildings there are 500 years old, so we're told. They could be even older, but
Wow.
like old Montreal looks like old
Yeah,
Europe.
Montreal was the planned city. Yeah, it was like a Masonic sort of laid out city, like Washington, similar to Washington,
Yeah,
but earlier.
yeah, the old part of the city was, yeah, yeah, definitely centered around the old port. And then there's the chateau there and a fort that's there and all kinds of stuff. Yeah. So I guess all of
Almost
that
like the Templar
combined,
presence.
it's no surprise that I'm kind of out there videoing old buildings in Calgary. You know, outdoorsy. I don't mind walking around for, I don't mind walking for 45 minutes to get to a place that I know where there's a cool church or whatever, and walking home.
Yeah,
Doesn't
well, they
bother me.
call it boots on the ground
I
for a
like being
reason.
outside, and I like old
Got to
stuff.
get out there with your boots on the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you must be kind of like that too. You kind of like old antique stuff. I mean, the old photographs, especially, you really like, I know. But have you been kind of into like other like old stuff, like antique cars or old, I don't know, old?
Yeah, no, not so much cars, but I like trains. Like where I grew up in Seymour, it was like a pretty much a town, a train sort of town, and we had like the old steam trains that come through now and then, take the kids to wherever, like on the steam train. And yeah,
That's cool.
I like those sort of things. But also I used to repair cameras, like back in the 90s. I did an apprenticeship to repair, the old cameras.
Okay. Yeah. That's neat.
Yeah, and then it was it was going to be my career back in like early 2000, but then digital cameras came out.
Yeah, and there went that, right? Yeah.
Like it was all about the zoom. How big is the zoom? Like, and then it became how many megapixels. Oh no, and it all went downhill in the camera industry from there. If you weren't a big player, got nudged out. So I moved on.
Yeah, I guess that would happen,
work,
wouldn't it?
but yeah, but I used to love working on those old cameras. Just an appreciation of just antiques that people would bring in sometimes.
You're whistling my tune, my friend. You mentioned old trains and old cameras. Those are two. I love old trains.
Yeah,
and I love old cameras.
The way clockwork toys and things work. I just like to dismantle things and just understand them.
I grew up
Doesn't
around.
have to be on a computer.
Yeah, I grew up around old trains too, actually, and lots of my family worked for the railroad out of Montreal. So, and I've always lived near the train tracks, the railroad tracks. The sound is comforting to me. It doesn't bother me to hear the train clickety clacking down the track. It's about 100 yards, roughly 100 meters from where I am. The train runs right by. Sometimes you could probably hear it on my live streams going by in the background. And I find it a comforting sound because in Montreal, our house was near the train tracks. My grandparents' farm was near the train tracks. And there was an old train museum close to where I lived as a kid too. So.
Oh wow, that'd be cool. Yeah, I was going to say, where I grew up, it was pretty much directly in between Melbourne and Sydney, like in the middle. So every morning, like almost 6 o'clock, the freight trains would come past. So the boom gates just near my house would go boom, 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 for like half an hour every day.
Yeah.
It's like, so it's the sound of just the train itself. But yeah, brings back memories.
And especially you mentioned the steam trains. I love those things. They're so fascinating. I think I don't know what you think, but I think a lot of that is old world tech, the old steam engine trains, and even old cameras too. I think photography is probably 100 years older than they tell us it is.
Yeah, Mind Unveiled does a special about photography, right? And he shows that I think it's called The Green Knight. They show the movie called The Green Knight, old comic book thing, but they show a version of photography where they, from the 1400s, using a pinhole and coated paper in a darkened room.
Also, like a camera obscura kind of.
Like a portrait. Yeah, it was camera obscura, but like using chemicals on the paper as well, and basically like a portrait in 1400s, But it was like a comic book sort of movie, but it was showing like they were showing you, and that's what Mind Unveiled was saying in these videos. Like they're showing you basically how this happened. It's called The Green Knight, and he does a video about it. So you know that they had in the 1400s medieval times that as long as they had the right chemicals. I mean, camera obscura itself goes back to like Roman times.
Yeah, camera obscura just as a raw technique. yeah, is really old. But
Yeah,
then when you add the chemicals, I could see how that could be tied into sort of the Middle Ages alchemy, because they were always messing around with all
yeah,
kinds of different
yeah. Somebody
vapors and
could have been
chemicals.
like, and it, with Biggs lately, like the stuff that he's been the last like 6 months, he's been pointing out about painted people that he's been finding on photos. It was
Yes,
just an odd occasional thing now and then, but like you'd see like just normal photo, and then like the rest of the streets painted. There's a painted car, you know. And yes, like when you zoom out, it was probably just to make it look better or nicer. It was artistic or whatever, but it makes
symmetrical
me
or
wonder
whatever.
about
Yeah,
like the history of photography, like where like when I was a kid, they used to teach you how to like trace outlines of things, like how to connect the dots and color in between the lines,
yeah.
as a just something that kids did, But I wonder whether like 100 years ago, 150 years ago, that was like a professional thing that they did. They colored in the photos, they painted the photos. How far
Well, I
back
can
did that
even
go? Like, I
I
mean,
can
the photos,
remember.
like the
Sorry, go ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
No, please. After you.
No, I was just gonna say, like the old paintings, like from the Renaissance and stuff, like they look super realistic, Just saying.
A lot of those look like they could have been those old photograph techniques you're talking about, and then they just paint over it in a sense so that it's not an original painting or a portrait where the artist would stretch a canvas and then he would prime it and then he might charcoal in a few shapes of the subject matter that he's painting and then he starts painting. But this actually could have been a photograph that was done in that old technique you're talking about, and then they paint over that and then they just say, oh no,
Yeah,
it's a painting. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
yeah. Like when I started looking at like photographic techniques and like the history, like one thing I was looking at was Napoleon, and like I was looking at portraits around the time when photography was starting in France. This is like 1836, and there were photos of some of like the generals of like the second Napoleon Empire, like 1840s, and then there's portraits from earlier, like of Napoleon's generals back in like 1810, and they're not that much different. The portraits that were like drawn, sketched, compared to the photos, or like
Right.
later portraits. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
like the pose and everything. It was a difference, but I don't know. One could have come from the other. You know what I'm saying?
It's a very, very subtle difference because the composition and everything is the same. It's just that the medium looks like it could be slightly different, but very similar. I
Yeah,
think
and
I
then
know what
like
you mean. Yeah.
you, when you think that like things were printed, the Gutenberg Bible was what 1527 or something, like 500 years ago. We had printing, and they were printing pictures in medieval times in books. They were printing maps, for God's sakes. I mean, they could do detail.
Yeah, they could.
And then you
Well,
look at like,
even
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, even as a kid, I remember at my great grandparents' house, they had really, really old family portraits in
Hmm.
little frames. And these were small portraits, 4 inch by 6 inch or 3 by 4. Old black and white photographs in fancy little gold or
Yeah.
brass frames or whatever up on a mantle. But they were black and white photographs, but they were painted. They had been they paint the clothing blue and they paint the flesh tones
Wow.
and the rosy cheeks
Yeah,
and the blue
that's
eyes
exactly what I'm
maybe.
talking
And
about. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that's she had a lot of those. Some were straight up black and white, just untouched photos, and some of them were professionally, like they were taken at a photography studio by a professional photographer, and then they were
Hmm.
colorized. And back then, to colorize, they painted them with, I guess, dyes or paints or stains, or I'm not
Yeah.
sure what the process was, but they would actually paint, I guess, the negative. I'm not sure though. No, probably not. They would
Hmm.
probably paint the print, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
not even sure. But as a kid, I remember like old photographs that were black and white, but they were painted.
yeah, yeah. That's amazing. What people got up to. Yeah, and I mean, you look at like the old encyclopedias and things, and just like they've got photos. You know, like they're full of photos from like the 1900s, early 1900s. They use pictures to demonstrate things. Like or they don't make books like that anymore.
No, an entire encyclopedia A to Z is the size of just one volume of the encyclopedias from when I was a kid. The encyclopedias that I
Yeah, I
had
don't think you
access
can
to
even
when I
buy
was a kid
encyclopedias
coming
anymore.
up in the 70s, probably not. When I was a kid coming up in the 1970s, the encyclopedias I used were from the 60s and 70s. Maybe my
Yeah.
grandparents had some from the 50s, but like just the letter
Mm.
A was like 2 volumes. Now forget it.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah,
the dictionary gets thinner and thinner and skinnier and skinnier.
yeah.
Who was it? Somebody I was
1984.
I was either it was either a comment I saw on a video or a comment in a chat on a live stream, but somebody was saying that it's important to keep visiting like old antique shops because you never know what you'll find
Yeah,
in
no,
some
those
old
beats.
antique shop. Yeah, maybe it was Beats.
Yeah, we were talking about, yeah, because the dictionary, and then that's part of 1984. The book 1984,
Yes. Yeah,
where
yeah.
they keep on they're like resizing the dictionary. One of the guys is like working on the latest version of the dictionary. It's going to be like version 11 or something, and then they're removing words like that so that people will no longer be able to fully express themselves. It'll just be double plus good. Like you take away all the different ways, words that will convey certain feelings. You don't have a choice in how you do it. You just either do it like A or B. So that people become just they will no longer be able to even understand concepts because it can't be explained to them anymore. They're just dumb.
Yeah, but they'll sell that
And
idea as streamlining the language and making it more efficient and therefore easier to learn and understand when actually the opposite will be the result, right? Because like you said, you wouldn't be
exactly,
able to accurately express your ideas, your passions, your thoughts.
it becomes
What?
emotional. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, a perfect example of that is the word sus. Like somebody says, so that instead of saying that guy's acting suspicious, that guy's sus.
yeah. And that they shorten the word. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
lazy. Use the whole word. Use proper English.
yeah, and I mean our personal devices had a lot to do with the rapid decline of and crumbling of our language. With texting and stuff, is because everything's acronyms and letters and emojis now. So people don't
Yeah,
even
I take
people don't
offence
even
that the sorry, I was just going to say, I take offense that the people want to make everything easier for me. I don't want things made easier for me. I want to do things the hard way, the old-fashioned way.
yeah. There's I mean, it's hard to understand there's a lot of stuff that's hard to understand in written text, like sarcasm or context or humor. And like people
Yeah,
don't even type out ha 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 anymore. They don't even type out I am laughing out loud. They just type in LOL. But then when they're saying it, they don't even say LOL. They say lol. So it keeps getting shortened and shortened. The phrase I am laughing out loud at what you have said has now shortened to lol
yeah,
in a matter of what,
yeah.
10
It's
years?
shocking. Yeah, and you wonder if you will be able to have a conversation with these people in another 10 years. The new generations coming up.
Well, what happens when they shorten a word or change the meaning of a word and it backfires on them? Like, for example, I just used the example, the word sus, right? Like people, instead of saying he's suspicious, they just say that dude is sus. But actually, the word sus already exists. Like you're sussing
Oh,
out something, you're investigating something, you're filtering through something, you're grasping or coming to a realization of something. You're sussing something out.
but that's the thing. I mean, you with the English language, you can have multiple words meaning different things, the same sound. You know
Oh,
what I mean?
absolutely.
Like completely, like 4 or 5 different like words that use this that sound the same, but they're pronounced slightly differently. You know, and they just end up in our language. Like it's amazing how much has changed just since I was born.
Well, and then there's a lot of more ancient cultures that they don't even bother creating a word for a new object anymore. They just adopt, let's say, the English version of that word instead. Like in
Yeah.
Japan, I think the term for gas station in Japan is basically you say gas station with a Japanese accent, gas station or something like that. I'm not
Yeah.
even joking you. And you know what the Japanese word for an orange, like the fruit orange? You know what the Japanese word for orange is?
I've no idea. What is
Oranju.
it?
Oranju.
Orange. No.
Because there's no Japanese, like in
Yeah,
the
they probably
creation
didn't
of
have
the
orange.
Japanese language, there was no word for the citrus fruit orange.
Yeah.
So when oranges were
Languages are
introduced,
funny.
they just fuck it, orange, good enough.
Yeah. How do you say it? Orange. Orange. Okay.
Yeah, you know.
Hey, by the way,
And
like
that,
I was watching your other live stream the other week about was it Uzbekistan and the Native American dress?
yeah.
That was great.
Oh, thank you. The there's recent studies showing DNA links between American Indians and people from, well, here in Canada, what we call sort of the northern Middle East. You know what? It's sort of those Stan regions, Uzbekistan, and all of that. And then
Yep,
they've
the
also,
stand.
yeah, and they've also found correlation of DNA between the Polynesian peoples and some South American
Yeah,
DNA.
yep, that's
So
true.
I also found that
Yeah,
fascinating.
what I found that yeah they found from Japanese DNA in Peru in
Yeah, well, and then what's that one offshoot of Japanese? They say that they were most
the
likely the original
the Anu.
the
They're
Anu.
called the Anu.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, they have white skin, whitish features. But Robert Seffer looks into them. Do you watch Robert Seffer?
Yes, I
He's like
do
a
actually. I've
anthropologist.
subscribed to
Yeah,
him. I've subscribed to him for a
yeah.
long time. Yeah. I like most of
I
his
like
stuff.
him. Yeah, he's great because he goes in depth and he doesn't care what the mainstream thinks. He's like, I'm an anthropologist. It's my job to question these things and to piece it all together. And here's what I found, you know. And you can't just keep on with your old head in the sand, denying things once it's been proven and accepted. You know, you can't keep just ignoring it. Like, and he'll assume that that's how it is. You know,
Yeah.
because it's been shown. Um, but yeah, like he goes on about the Anu and shows that they're most likely like a split off of the Aryans that were like this basically the Scythian people that spread over quite a big area, but at an earlier time, you know. So really, they're of the same people, you know, like going way back. It's interesting.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I like
And yeah,
Robert's
you look,
stuff. I've watched
yeah,
him for a
yeah,
long time.
yeah. He looks at the languages, you know, that they call it that Anglo. Sorry, no, the Indo-European language groups, and how certain
Yes.
certain languages are not included in that. But you look at it, it's spread all over the world, you know, and looking at not just like the migration of people, but and you know all the physical evidence, but just the language groups as well is an interesting way to look at it. It's all part of the anthropology. field.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I like how he comes at it from different angles. And he finally got a
Mm.
chance to feed that goose. He's been trying to feed
Yes.
that goose for 2 years.
Yeah, yeah.
uh,
That was good. Well, not him. It was the other guy, but yeah,
oh man,
yeah. I like how he does. Yeah, he does his
I
little
like when he
music
just sits down and
intro,
eats a
and
meal right in front of the camera, and I'm like, now
yeah,
I'm hungry.
yeah. I'm gonna do a food review.
Yeah, why not? Right in the middle of my history video, I'm gonna quickly tell you about this Thai salad I had. It was delicious, a little spicy, but very tasty. Yeah, and you're like, okay, whatever. Yeah, he's pretty good. But you
Huh?
know what? A lot of what he talks about, again, much like a lot, not all, but a lot of what Graham Hancock talks about, they tie into each other, and it ties into,
Mm.
again, a lot of the research that we do in our community. Ancient civilization
Yep.
that had certain
Yeah.
advancements. Perhaps there was some kind of, well, definitely there was some kind of cataclysm, and there was
Yeah.
some of these more advanced or more knowledgeable uh, people from sort of the shattered civilization spread out and tried to share their knowledge with whoever they encountered after
Yeah.
sort of the
There was.
dust settled or the
That's
waters
exactly
receded,
right.
or if you will. Yeah.
Yeah, or when Atlantis sunk, or however, whichever angle you want to come at it from. But the Bronze Age collapse, it wasn't a small thing, and it wasn't like as sudden as we think. I think it was gradual, a couple of generations at least. But
Well, I think there was more than one reset, if you will, or cataclysm. And
of course,
myself, I think they come in cycles. I think these are cyclical. The ones that are naturally occurring,
yeah,
because I think
that's right.
there's credit that could be given to both naturally occurring
Yeah,
cataclysms that have reset us, as well as man-made or man-directed or caused by man
yes.
cataclysms.
I'll,
And
I'll say on that point, right? I've been watching some like I look at the historical narrative, like the proper what we're supposed to believe and what we're told has happened. And
mhm,
there's one guy, Bruce Gore. He looks at it from a Christian perspective and tries to line up the biblical narrative to the historical narrative without any bias, just trying to line up and see where you can line things up. So it, but then some other Christians that I've been looking
well,
at,
that's interesting. Yeah,
they look at Mudflood, right? And they're willing to look at Mudflood and some of these other things that we're looking at, but they look at the Mudflood because they're so used to seeing the flood that they're willing to accept the Mudflood, but they won't look at multiple mudfloods or individual strategically targeted areas, localized mudfloods. It's just the Great Flood. And I don't know. It annoys me that they won't look at it further or
yeah,
deeper than
yeah,
that. It's just changing the name.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, I can
So yeah,
accept
they're
that.
kind of like they're almost there. Their foot's in the door, but they haven't completely walked through the across the threshold yet. Sort of. Yeah, yeah. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and Biggs has
And that's
been
kind of,
making the point that. Sorry.
I was just going to say, that's kind of the thing with a lot of these guys, Graham Hancock and Robert Zephyr and countless others, is that they're real close to the bullseye. And who knows, maybe Graham Hancock is well aware of the mud flood idea, and perhaps even
Yep.
subscribes to that idea. But even he, with the slings and arrows that he's had to face by going against the grain, even he, I think, would
Mm.
have to have, just because of the spotlight that he's on, and he's already so much under a
Yeah, you wouldn't
microscope
want
and
to.
so heavily,
Yeah,
he's got to pull back the reins a little bit, I think.
he has to be
Right? I
careful
mean,
what he puts out because once it's there, he's going to get torn apart.
yeah, and he's just now coming out of the stages where he's torn apart, because the stuff he was saying in the 90s, they're finally, the establishment is finally starting to come around to, oh, Gobekli Tepe. Yeah. I guess that
Mm.
Graham Hancock guy was right after all, and we just crucified the hell out of
Yeah.
of them for 3 decades, So once bitten, twice shy, he may not want to go all in. If he's aware of any kind of mud flood idea, he may not want to throw his hat in the ring with that, which is understandable. Whereas some anonymous clown like me out here in Calgary, Alberta, I mean, I don't care. I can stay fairly anonymous because Graham Hancock was already famous. So,
Yeah.
I'm not famous. Nobody
Yeah,
knows me from Adam, really. So I don't care.
I kind of like that too. Like, yeah, I can have my opinion, and it doesn't really matter. No, I can sort of come to any conclusion. Nobody's really going to care. Below the
Let me
radar.
ask you. Let me ask you a little bit about that. Like, have you talked to a lot of people, sort of personally, in your personal life about this, like close friends or family members, about, reset or
Yeah,
Mudflood?
I've tried to. Like, I don't know. After Trump lost the election, people stopped listening to me.
Yeah. Because politics, everything's got to be
It
political,
was
and it's
different.
so
You know what
divisive.
I mean? Like,
Yeah,
I gave up after that point in trying to just convince people of things. If you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I got to be happy with myself, and like come to an understanding in my own mind. Like even last in the last bigs, he's like, well, I don't really know. I can't say that my mind is made up on some of these things. I'm leaning towards this, but it could just as easily be this, and maybe I'm completely wrong. I mean, you've just got to be from that stance and not try to like preach to other people like I used to maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and it is this way, and I'm telling you it's this way, and I know, I don't know. I just don't know. So, I
yeah.
just do my own research,
That's
and
kind of how
when
I
my friend,
come at
I
it.
have tried to, yeah, when I have friends come over, I'll show them, some old maps and some of the history of the city and stuff like that. They find that some of the autodidactic stuff is interesting, or a John Levi video, but they don't go too deeply into it, and they sort of know where I stand, and just don't we just don't go there, unless
Yeah.
there's a reason to. I'd like to sort of maybe have more friends. Like there's a couple of people on Autodidactic's channel that want to do a meetup, and I know he has a lot of people in Western Australia. So I have met a couple of people at Campbell, and we had like the barbecue a year ago, and there was about 40 people,
Yeah, I heard
maybe
about
50
that. Yeah,
people. Yeah,
yeah, I
and
heard it
so
was
I know
great.
there's a presence of people. Yeah. All these people, they all like John Levi and all that. It was a like-minded sort of crowd, but it was weird that Campbell was like a rock star sort of thing, like at the center, and all the focus was on Campbell, so you didn't really get to sort of chat with other people so much. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's
Yeah,
not
I get
like
what you're
just sitting
saying.
down with your friends. Yeah,
Yeah,
but I know there's
yeah,
people out there, that think this way.
yeah. I found that out quite quickly too. As soon as uh, uh, fairly shortly after I sort of kicked myself in the ass and said I got to video some of this stuff and start a channel and show it because, uh, again, we were talking earlier about Streets of Tartaria, and I've mentioned before on this channel that wasn't the first channel that I saw with this content. It was maybe the third, but anyway, that was the one that spurred me, was
Yeah,
because he was showing buildings that are literally down the street that look exactly the same. So I'm like, I got to show this stuff and maybe get other people that live in Calgary interested, maybe other people in Alberta and
yeah,
other people in Canada. But I never thought that I'd be meeting people from the US, Australia, like all over the world, in the UK and in different parts of Europe, and you name it, right? And it's
yeah.
great. But the cool
It's
thing
because we're
too,
seeing the same things. We're looking at very
yeah,
similar occurrences.
yeah. And the cool thing too is you were touching on Biggs a lot, and
Yeah,
that's kind of how you and I think, sort of got to know each other, was through Biggs's channel, and then we talked about the MeWe social platform, whatever you want
yep,
to call it. It's like a Facebook thing, right? But it's MeWe, and that's been great
yeah. It's really good.
because I've ended up meeting somebody through Stuff Beagle's Mudflood Club on MeWe that is here in Calgary, and we've done
Hey,
2
cool.
meetups already. And I think
Yeah, that's great.
it was through Campbell at Autodidactic that I found out about Bernie, who lives here in Calgary. So he and I are going to
Yeah.
do a meetup and going to do a project together also. And there's about 5 or 6 people that comment on almost all of my videos that live here in Calgary.
Yeah.
And then there's a few that live sort of in outlying areas within an hour or two drive of Calgary. So it's amazing.
Yes.
The meetups are fun.
Kimberly, and there's a bunch of others that are in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Kimmery's real close. She's in Medicine Hat. I just the other day met in the chat a guy from Medicine Hat also. Um, on Bernie's
Ah,
channel, I
cool.
think it was. So yeah, it's great because the meetups are really cool and they're really fun, but also doing like what you and I are doing right now, just chatting, and we live at
Yeah.
opposite ends of the realm, if you will. So it's what that old saying, it's a small world.
Exactly.
I used I used to think, that's bullshit. It's a small world. Come on, it's not a small world. But I think it quite literally is much smaller than we think, and that there are
Yeah.
lands beyond what we know of this realm.
Oh, don't get me started. How
So,
much do you know about Book of Enoch, and how much time do we have?
like, quite literally, it's a small world. The world that we know is small, but the overall realm, I think, is much larger
Yeah.
than we've been led to believe as well. Well, that could be a subject for a whole other chat, but
I think the same thing.
planting the seed and putting it out there, that's just
Oh,
kind
yeah.
of what I think. And it's funny how some of these sayings, these expressions, these turns of phrase, or even
Yeah.
things like you'd mentioned, movies, comic book stuff, video games, TV shows, a lot of this is hidden in plain sight, and it has been for a long time. It's just that it's taken us a while to sort of wake up to these little hints that we're given, that supposedly we're supposed to be given. They have to, by some thing that they have going with these powers that should not be, that do what they do, that they have to reveal in a lot of respects
Yeah.
what their plan is, what they're doing, what their agenda is.
That's
But
it.
they can do it. They can do it
That's
occulted.
what
They
they
can
have.
do it.
They feel that makes it all okay.
Yeah, it's like
That makes it
yeah,
okay
that's
that
what
they
it
told us
is. They
they were
think that
gonna
they're getting our
steal from
permission
us,
by doing it.
because
Yeah, because
we're too
we're
stupid to do anything about it spiritually. They're not going to reap any karma for it. I mean, come on.
yeah. So yeah, that's the thing, is that they feel that they've gotten our permission because we're not rising up against it. But it's because most people are asleep to it. I mean, up until a few years ago, I was asleep to almost everything that was going on around me. It was kind of a slow progression, and
Yeah.
this research and what I'm doing now with my channel with this mud flood. I mean, that's only been within 2 years. You know,
Mm.
I mean, prior to that, you know, the biggest the biggest lie to me was, I think, was probably the moon landings, or maybe 9/11.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know,
Well, that's it.
then all of a sudden it's like, no, there's so much that we've been spoon fed that's been just been complete utter nonsense. The wool's been they've somehow simultaneously managed to pull the rug out from under us and throw the wool over our eyes at the same time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and then tell us it's raining. Yeah,
Yeah. Piss on my head and tell me it's raining. Yeah, right. Oh,
Hey, Frankie, I've got a question to ask you.
yeah.
When I was like helping Beats out, we were often looking for subjects to like research and like little side projects that we could get into or whatever. And one that we looked into, but we never managed to actually get done, that I think would be right up your alley, We started, but we never completed looking into boiler explosions.
Oh, wow.
Early
Yeah.
early boiler explosions and the amount of them that were captured on camera and the stories of them and how it just explains a whole bunch of things. But and then Biggs put it into context when he's saying that basically we dug up the trains and trams and whatnot, some of these things, and then got them working. But it took a little time for us to get them working. And then you look up the early history of steam, and it goes back like a fair way.
Yes.
There's a fair time that they were tinkering with these things to perfect it, but there's still, in the Midwest and in the mid 1800s, there's still a lot of boiler explosions. So I don't know. I was wondering if it's like really cool photos as well. If you find some detailed photos, there's a lot out there. I think it'd make a cool special for something on your channel.
Yeah, I'll have a look into that actually. That's kind of a neat idea because yeah, with the whole train thing, I'm kind
Mm-hmm.
of the same thought that, I think trains are an older tech and that they were sort of rediscovered, but could only I like to apply the 80-20 rule to a lot of stuff in life because I think it really rings true a lot of times. And I think they looked at
Yep.
these old steam train engines and sort of had an 80% grasp of how it worked.
Yep.
But they still had to
Yep.
sort of re-engineer or reverse engineer, I should say, the other 20% to figure it out. And that part is where potentially it was the experimental stages of a lot of this tech that,
Yeah.
train explosions, boiler explosions.
Because
But how the hell
I
do
tell
you
you that.
capture a boiler explosion on film, by the way? You have to have pre-knowledge that it's going to explode. And like,
Yeah.
somebody who knows about boilers will know, okay, this thing's going to blow any second, but then you got to set up a camera or a video camera, depending on when it happened, and either video record it or take a photo. And if this is happening in the 1890s or the
Yeah.
1860s, um, I mean, the photography then was, you just,
It
it's a one in a
it
million
makes
chance to get the timing right to be able to capture a boiler explosion on a
it makes me
photograph.
think of in the Adams family, what's the dad's name, Mr. Adams,
Fester,
and he's always got his train set.
Gomez Adams, yeah.
Gomez, and yeah, he's got his train sets, and he's always like running his little model trains to like crash into each other.
Yeah, I uploaded a video a while back of train wrecks and just, with music in the background. And they used to do that at county fairs and stuff all the time. They used to purposely set
Purposely.
two steam locomotives in a head-on collision and purposely wreck them for the crowds for entertainment. And I'm
Yeah.
like, that is you sick sons of bitches destroying those beautiful old trains for your
Yeah.
amusement.
Yeah.
But
Train lives matter.
that's when diesel engines were coming in, so they supposedly didn't need the old steam locomotives anymore, so
Yeah.
might as well get rid
Oh,
of them.
also, also another thing that I came across when I was looking into the history of trains, locomotives, there was a point a phase at the end of the steam engine era where they switched to compressed air engines, and there were a couple of photos that I could find, and then you never see them again. And I was wondering maybe you might want to look into that too. Compressed air,
You know what? I've never even heard of that.
meaning close.
I've
Yeah,
heard of
yeah.
the vacuum tubes, like the pneumatic tubes that you sometimes still see in office buildings where they could send messages through, like, from one floor to the other through suction through these tubes.
Oh, those are
and
cool. Yep.
and they would even send them from building to building through tube
Mm.
networks. And I know in the
Yep.
Victorian era they were messing around with tube tunnels with vehicles that could move people around underground in the same
Wow.
idea through using vacuum suction pneumatic tubes that
Yeah.
would
Right.
not pneumatic tubes, but tubes that you could curve or go do straightaways and curve and conform to the lay of the land. And yeah, they're
Yeah. Yeah.
basically giant versions of these message tubes in office buildings. So I'd heard of that,
That's
but I've
really
never heard
crazy.
of compressed air trains. That's a
Yeah,
new
it's
one
just
on
something I
me.
came across. Yeah, just mentioned in the Wikipedia thing, and there was a separate page for it. I'll pick up some info and go through it again. But yeah, I just thought you might find that interesting that they phase that out pretty quickly. You know.
See, times like this, when I hear about stuff like that, I wish my uncle, who worked for CP Rail, Canadian Pacific Railway, for like 50 years, I wish he was still around. God rest his soul, because I could just phone him up and ask him, "Hey, Unc, what's the deal with compressed air trains?" You know,
Guess we need to dig a bit more. But yeah, no, it's if they had like
that's neat.
almost close to free energy back then, and then they just threw it all away. You know. No, we're going with diesel. It's just
Yeah, we're going to go with
how things worked
petroleum
out.
products. Well, if you think about it, right, all the big names that we hear, right? We hear of, like Standard Oil and American Steel.
Yeah, Rockefeller.
Uh,
Yeah,
yeah, Rockefeller and Carnegie, like all of these people, right? Well, it would only make, and Henry Ford, it would only make
and Vanderbilt.
sense for them to get together, which they did on a number of occasions, to strategically plan. They could get rid of the electric streetcars, get rid of electric cars, get rid of steam locomotives, switch everything to petroleum trains, petroleum buses, petroleum cars, and they all benefit. The
Mm,
steel industry benefits,
yeah,
the Henry Ford benefits, Carnegie benefits, the oil industry benefits, everybody benefits,
yeah.
except for us, because you can't hop on an electric streetcar anymore. Well, you can, but
And
you
it
got
all
to
gets
pay.
forgotten about. Yeah,
Somebody's got to pay for
it's
the electricity now, you know?
and here we are 120 years later. You know, 130 years later, and it's just we're still trying to get that. Like we had it, and it was taken from us.
You know what the double dumbasses in charge of transportation here in Calgary did? We had we had these freaking clowns. We had electric streetcars starting in the 1890s. No, somewhere around there. Anyways, we had
Yeah,
electric streetcars for from the 1800s to World War II.
yeah,
And then they switched them all out to buses.
yeah.
But they didn't go electric buses like Vancouver. No, they went diesel buses, petroleum-based fuel buses, right?
Of course. Yeah,
And they completely got rid of all of the train. There's no streetcars or trolley trains, whatever you want to call them. It's all now buses,
mm,
right? So they do all of that.
yeah,
Then in the early 80s, they decide, oh, you know what, we want to put a train in, because people can get around a lot more easily on a train. We'll just run the train above ground on one of the streets. Oh, duh. You mean like the old electric streetcars, you jackasses?
yeah.
And then what do? They make it a freaking above ground on the street electric streetcar. But it's like a train, like those
Wow.
European trains you see, like in Sweden and
In Germany.
Belgium,
Yeah,
that run on the electric cables that are above. And it's,
yeah,
a 4-car train, but it's like a subway,
yeah,
but above ground. So they got rid of
yeah.
it,
The
only to
trams.
50 years later bring it back. Not even 50 years. Yeah, no, about
Yeah.
50 years later, bring it back. It's like, what in the hell
It's like
is wrong with you guys?
I was
Why didn't you just keep the
I watch a
bloody
channel.
street trams to begin with? Just keep them. Like,
Yeah,
why? Oh, it's
yeah.
cost
No,
prohibitive to keep them. Well, it's
of course.
more
Yeah,
cost prohibitive to get rid of them, bring in buses, then add a new train on top of the buses they already have. It's goofy.
yeah. And then when you look at like the viaducts and the street raisings that they've done over the years, you've got to consider like there were trams earlier. Like most cities that I've looked at had trams 100 years ago. Like it's a common thing.
Yes, there's even a lot of small Alberta towns, prairie towns, that had, like 2,000 people in them, and they had electric streetcars or trams that maybe it would only have 2 or 3 different routes or loops that it would do, but still it was to get around the city and maybe into a couple of the close neighboring residential areas that were adjacent to the commercial area. Yeah, sometimes it's just the smallest little towns would have these pretty decent electric streetcar systems.
Yeah.
But a viaduct is a good way to cover all that up. We just tell you,
Yeah,
oh, we want to
there's
level all the streets. We just want to level them so it's easier to drive on, and it just covers up all the old infrastructure and the first 2, 3 levels of a building, 4 levels of a building, depending. There's like
exactly.
streetcar trade tracks underneath these viaducts, and
Yeah.
who knows what junk
Yeah.
was left under there too, though. If once they just finally seal them all
That's
up,
the thing. Like we just
like not even just the
yeah.
building
But
facades that are hidden under there and the old streets and sidewalks and streetlights maybe, but even just the old junk that's just left lying around. Like there could be old tools, old cars, old bicycles, old baby
yeah.
carriages or
I
strollers or
mean,
prams, whatever you want to call them. Like who knows what's down there?
if you watch the Atlanta Viaduct special that Beaks did like a couple of years ago, there's so much that was there beforehand. Even in the official narrative, there's entire streets, like stores, neighborhoods. They're all gone. They raised it up, and they were just covered up. They're still there though. This is the thing. Like they've just been closed off.
Yep, the only people that have access are city maintenance guys. That's pretty much about it.
But even then, we like when I first started with Biggs, talking about viaducts, he was only aware of about 4 cities that he was definitely 100% certain of at that time. But like in the last couple of months, I think it's starting to gain a lot more awareness. People are starting to become aware, and you start seeing it more and more and more. Not every city, but you're seeing it a lot in places you didn't expect.
Yeah, he's finding dozens, literally dozens of cities now.
And Paul Cook, like looking the way that it's done in England is completely different. Like they're doing things for different reasons in different ways, and earlier times and things. And then like they can always say it was the World War II bunkers, in England, and they got
Yeah,
a whole
there's some of that.
different story going on there.
Yeah, they can get away with some of that stuff in parts of England, France, Belgium, Germany, anywhere during any of the 2 so-called Great Wars, right? World War I and II.
Mm-hmm.
They could get away with, oh, well, this was built as bomb shelters, bunkers, or this was built as part of I don't know, an evacuation system, tunnel system, or storage for munitions, whatever they could. The enemy built these tunnels, and we just found them, back in the '60s or whatever, right? They can't really do that in the States, except for with a couple of narratives that are, in my opinion, overused. And one of them is the Underground Railroad to help free the slaves up to the northern states.
Yeah.
But I mean, tunnels going completely underground from, let's say, I don't know, Natchez, Mississippi, up to I don't know, Portland, Maine, is inconceivable. These arched, roofed, bricked, 7-foot high tunnels that, I mean, that's thousands of miles. If they do find tunnels, it's not because they were built to help free slaves. But if they do find tunnels in the U.S., the only thing they can say is, "Oh, it's an old drainage tunnel, or it's an old water movement tunnel, or it's the Underground Railroad." They can't use World War II as an excuse. They can't use World War I as an excuse.
Yeah. But then why is it perfectly rounded? For like hundreds and hundreds of miles, it's just perfectly round, made of brick arches and. Like, come on.
Want to hear something absolutely ridiculous? Is in Saskatchewan, which is the province next to me, east of where I am.
Yeah.
There's a city there called Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan.
Okay.
And they found a tunnel system and sort of parts of an underground city under the city of Moose Jaw.
Huh.
It's like buildings that have basements under the basements that they didn't know, and they're all connected by tunnels, and it's all underneath sort of the downtown core of the older original part of the city.
Wow.
And they couldn't explain it. So what they had to
Isn't
say was
Saskatchewan like completely flat?
pretty much, especially sort of central and southern Saskatchewan. Once you get up in the north, there are lots of hills and stuff. But yeah, the area that we're talking about is as flat as a pancake. You could watch your. The joke is you could watch your dog run away for 3 days. 3 days straight, you could just see him running and running. Anyway, Saskatchewan, where no man can leap to his death. Anyway, a guy shouldn't make jokes about that, but anyway. So they couldn't explain it, right? Because it's not like the Underground Railroad in the States. They couldn't use any war as an excuse. So they said, oh, well, it's from the Prohibition era in the 1930s.
Yeah, of course.
And there was
fallback.
Because the apparently the train station, the railroad in Moose Jaw, for whatever reason at that time in the 1920s and 30s, was a central hub, and one of the main lines went down into the States, directly from Moose Jaw into the States, and then you transfer from there to Chicago. So basically you could go straight from Moose Jaw to Chicago on a train. So apparently the narrative is that it's connected to Al Capone. Sure. And I'm like, get the hell out of here. First of all,
and that's when I see that, it may,
it could be.
Yeah, it may be so. It may be so, but that doesn't explain build it for that reason, like specifically to do that. I don't know.
Perhaps
a lot of effort to put in for that reason.
Perhaps it was used later for something like that, because there were speakeasies down there and stuff too, under some of the buildings, right? There were speakeasies. And this was all the narrative of Prohibition in the United States in the 1930s, right? But hold on a second here. Canada didn't have a prohibition in the 1930s. We had a temperance movement in the 1930s. And our temperance movement was basically on a voluntary basis. Cities or counties could choose to opt in or opt out of the temperance. So, I mean, places could sell alcohol and people could buy and drink alcohol if they wanted to. So there was no need for speakeasies to be built in secret underneath buildings up here in the first place. And secondly, we did have a prohibition called the Prohibition, but it was way before the 1930s in the US. It was in something like the 1890s or the early 1900s. So again, the story doesn't jive. So I just think that these are just mudflood buildings. That's
it seems what they thought was that.
Sorry, go ahead. Seems likely.
I was just going to say, if they were going to be using, like, if they were going to try and hide things for Prohibition, then they would probably just use what was already there, right?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking.
Dig a new tunnel.
As chances are, what they thought was the basement of the building was the original first floor, and then what they thought was a speakeasy underneath the basement was actually the original basement, and that the building was mud flooded one full floor, and the original first floor was what they came to know as the basement. But they'd give tours down there, and there's a whole thing, and the people that give the tours dress up like 1930s gangsters, see? Yeah, listen, copper, see, we're going to get you, see? You're not going to catch me, see? The filthy copper? Yeah. But that's bullshit when it comes to the prairies in Canada in the 1930s.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird how they can twist things.
They'll just make up anything to explain tunnels. Like you said, over in Europe and in the UK, they can just say, oh, it was because of the war. And people just go, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense, the war. And in some cases, sure, it could be from the war. They built a lot of bunkers and stuff during the war. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, is from England, and she grew up in London. During the war, she remembers having to go down into the underground, into the tube, the subway, until they got the
Yeah,
all
right.
clear. So I'm sure they built some. I mean, the World War II lasted a while, right? So, but you can't use that as an excuse for every single tunnel, especially ones that
Mm.
were very clearly built before the 1930s. If it was built in the 1850s, you can't say, oh, it's from the war. What war?
Yeah. And
And
this
if
is the
all the
thing.
men are
That's
off
I
fighting in the
like.
war, who's building the tunnels?
Yeah. You can only get to this place to reach these conclusions by applying logic, by looking at what's out there, piecing it together, and then just saying, "Hang on, this just doesn't make sense. Something's just not right here."
And again, that goes back to what we were talking about with this community, on the online portion of this community, is that there's people out there that they're fascinated by tunnels, and having to do with the reset and Mudflood, Tartaria, whatever you want to call it. So that's their thing, is they look into tunnels, right? They check out tunnels. I see tons of channels where these guys explore tunnels, and it's so fascinating. Some of them are filled with water, so they go down in rubber rafts. Some of them, they can walk in the tunnels just wearing boots, and these tunnels go for miles and miles and miles, and nobody knows they're there. It's incredible.
It is interesting, but yeah, I'm more interested in who built them and why are they there, or more to the point, what they're telling us, or the way that they were built doesn't add up. It just doesn't smell right to me, and
Yeah.
alarm bells start ringing.
Well, because what happens is, if you follow their narrative, they shoot themselves in the foot with the narrative, because they say, well,
Exactly.
okay, well, they were doing a lot of building, and there was lots of brick used, and that was a really easy and quick building material to mass produce, especially once you got into the industrial age, the industrial revolution, right, where everything became mechanized and automated, and then bada boom, bada bing, they could pound the stuff out. And it's like, well, okay, but you're also telling us around the same time that the cities only had, like, this city had only had 20,000 people, that city had only had 10,000
Exactly.
people were scratching out a living. It was a meager existence, shitty living conditions, uh, yada yada yada, poor sanitary condition, all of this stuff. So it's like, well, they're okay. Even if you could make the brick, get the brick, transport the brick, who's using the brick to build all of this stuff? By your own narrative,
Yeah.
from what you're telling us, from the populations of these places, there weren't enough people. So
And
then
do you
they
know
try to
what
fudge
annoys
the
me the most,
numbers by saying,
Frankie?
oh, there's a boom. All of a sudden it went from
Yeah.
10,000 to 40,000 in 2 years. Oh, that explains it. Give me a break.
Do you know what annoys me is that when I first started researching this, I would find time after time after time the building got torn down after 5 years, 10 years,
That
doesn't
too.
exist
Yeah.
anymore. Massive, like skyscraper almost. These early skyscrapers, they got torn down 10 years later. What?
And doesn't it take almost as many hands to dismantle a building as it does to build one? So if you're building a
Ah,
building in 1870 and you knock it down 20 years later in 1890, first of all, where are all you probably, it's by their narrative, it seems like there's not enough people to build it. But also by their narrative, even 20 years later, there's not enough people to take it apart and cart away all the rubble.
yeah. And that's where, like, sometimes we say that maybe some of the photos are old world. Maybe we found some of the photos, and so the historical narrative to account for some of that, mixed in amongst the real photos. Maybe there's buildings that were there that aren't there anymore, but they're not. They weren't there when they say they were.
Yeah, they can pepper the truth with lies and pepper lies with truth, and then it becomes a jumbled pile of mumbo jumbo, right? And it just, yeah,
And then they've got to
a
go
lot of
with
people.
it. They've got to run with it once they've said it.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, in a big city like, let's say, Montreal, Toronto, New York City, Boston, I don't know, Los Angeles, big cities. Okay, I could see how there'd be enough people. Okay, in the 1890s, these cities had 100,000 people in them. Okay, sure. But if it's like a smaller city or a town, like I asked you a while back if you talked to anybody in your family or friends about this subject matter. I've talked to my dad about this, and I shot some video where my dad and I were going somewhere, and we stopped in this town for gas. And this town is this little prairie town. It's like an hour and a half north of Calgary. It's about half an hour off the main highway. It's kind of sort of in the middle of nowhere. And there's
Hmm.
3 and 4 story red brick buildings built in the 1890s. The railroad didn't come into that town until I think 1927. So I was pointing this out to my dad and showing him like Mudflood windows and stuff, and he was like, "Yeah, that's weird. Like, how did they get the brick here?" And my dad has a
Yeah,
construction background, so he's like, "Yeah, you wouldn't even if there was a basement, you wouldn't build basement windows like that. You would have it, at least 6 or 8 inches off the ground because of
yeah,
moisture and rain, and especially here in Canada, snow." So he was kind of like questioning
yeah,
it too. And the thing is, like, that's the kind of town where I go, okay, this town's never had more than 3,000 people in it, ever.
yeah,
But
yeah.
it's
It doesn't
got,
need to be a big city,
but it's got
even
all
for
of
it to
these
have
huge
holes in the
buildings. Like,
narrative.
what the hell?
Yeah, that's amazing.
And by
How
their
can
own
that?
narrative, oh, it's a farming community. Well, then most of the population lived on farms or ranches. They didn't live in the city. The people that lived in the
Yeah,
cities were the school teachers and the doctors and the lawyers and the merchants and the blacksmiths and the hotel people, hotel staff, and the restaurant staff. And but
yeah,
the majority of the population lived out of the city. So what did all the farmers drop their plows and tools and head into the city and build all these brick buildings and then go back to tending their land again? Like what the hell's going on here?
yeah, and it seems that often that the buildings are not even properly used to whatever their stated purpose is. You know what I mean? Like they build them for a certain purpose, and they don't even do that. Like in the narrative, it just seems so wasteful. Why would you go to all that length to build this goddamn building and then just not even use it the way that you're saying you're going to use it? I don't know.
Right. Or a small
There's too
town,
many questions. Yes.
that has a population of 2,000 people, and they've got 6 breweries and 15
Yeah.
hotels, and each of these
And 12
hotels
churches.
has has 100 rooms. Like,
Yeah.
3,000 people. Why do you need 6 breweries and 10 or 12 hotels? Like,
Yeah.
okay, if it's a touristy city in some beautiful location, sure. But if you're out in the middle of, I don't know, the Midwest in the United States, or out in the middle of the prairies and here in Canada, or in the middle of nowhere, anywhere,
Mm.
it would make sense to have all of these hotels. Like, what, you have that many people tripping over each other to come and stay in your town for what? There's
Yeah. But
three
see,
thousand people in this town. What? There's nothing going on here.
yeah. And it makes you appreciate that they really wanted to tear all this history down. Like they probably did like tear it down a lot more than what still stands. A lot more than what we see. It was probably far more extensive, in my opinion. They were pretty successful, but still, they have to
Yeah,
explain the buildings that exist. There has to be a history behind them, and what they tell us has to add up, and it just doesn't in a lot of these cases.
that's why I try to run up there and video as much as I can here while I can, because again, it's a boom town. And every time I turn around, they're knocking something down and building a
Mm,
big, tall, like 30 or 40 stories condo building where there used to be a nice, like red brick row houses or something built in like the 1920s.
yeah,
Knock it down and put up this giant monstrosity.
yep.
So
We
I mean, I got
need
to get
more
out there and get
apartment
as much as I
complexes.
can.
Yeah,
Yeah,
never
yeah. We
enough apartment complexes.
need more glass and steel rectangles everywhere.
Yeah, it's shocking.
We don't. thank goodness again for I touched on the architectural restrictions, because there are actually some big condominium skyscrapers that they built along the river here in Calgary that they
Oh
made
yeah.
them look cool. Like they have like domed roofs, and
Okay. Yeah.
they they don't necessarily look old world, although it's kind of old world inspired. It's kind of, they almost kind of look like something out of the, I don't know if you had them over there in Australia, but the Jetsons cartoon. It's like a futuristic.
Yeah. Nice. So they're not brutalized,
It almost has
basically.
like a 1950s future vibe. No, they
Yeah.
build a brand new condo, but it looks aesthetically pleasing. It's not just a
Yeah.
giant rectangular thing.
Yeah.
It's not just a
Normally
monolith.
that interferes with the bottom line, so we can't do that normally.
Right. Well, and of course, these condos are high end, expensive, multi-million dollar condos to buy. These aren't, the average schmuck like me isn't going to be buying these places. So they're a lot fancier. The ones that they just bang up that are just big cubes or whatever, those are cheap. But yeah, in some parts of town, unfortunately, they still knock down the old buildings. But the ones they replace them with, at least they're not ugly. Some
Mm.
are, but not all of them. But yeah, every time I turn around, it's like, wait, there used to be a building there. Damn it.
Yeah.
Like there's buildings that I think of that I'm like, oh, I know a cool old place. And I go there and it's gone. Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, I can only find one building in one street. Oh, sorry, there's two buildings in one street that still have pavement light, and I remember it being everywhere. I just
Yeah,
can't find it anymore.
I don't, I don't remember pavement light. And I know pavement light was a thing here in Canada. It wasn't a really big thing, but it was a thing in some of the bigger cities like Vancouver and Toronto and Montreal. But I don't remember ever seeing any as a kid out east in Montreal or Toronto or Ottawa. And I don't remember seeing any after we moved here when I was 10 here in Calgary or even up in Edmonton. That's not to say there wasn't. I maybe just didn't notice. But now there aren't any. Not that I've seen in my travels here in Calgary. There's no pavement lights left,
Hmm.
unfortunately. But I
Still
can
sign on
definitely look
Mudflood, man.
for, yeah, there's still lots of that. And I'm sure that I could find signs of where there used to be pavement lights and they took them out and they put in those concrete slabs instead of pouring the concrete.
Yeah, but it's not very satisfying, is it?
No, it's not the same. It's not the same at all. Finding pavement lights would be cool because you know that there's a large cavity underneath that, a large hollow space. You know,
Yeah.
a cave or a basement or whatever term they use. I can't remember what the correct
Yep.
term is.
What lies
Well, what do you
beneath?
think, my friend? It's coming up on 11 p.m. here, my time.
Yeah, that's getting late for you. So, yeah, we've had a long, decent chat.
Yeah, we've had
Good.
a nice long chat. I hate to kind of cut it off here, but I'm sure you have things you want to get on with on your day off, your Sunday, and
Yeah, that's it.
it's getting a little long in the shadow for a fella here. I was up at 6 this morning because I had to work this morning, right? So
Oh, okay.
yeah, I don't have a regular schedule per se. I work at a local grocery store here, so sometimes I'll have Sunday, Wednesday off. Sometimes I'll have Friday, Sunday off. It differs from week to week. So I drew the short straw, and a guy had to work on a Saturday today. So yeah.
Oh well. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. You know, you just gotta take it as it comes.
That's right. Hey, at least I'm working, and at least it's a job that I enjoy.
Yep.
I don't
Yeah,
feel like,
that's what I said the other day to my friend. Like in life, I've learned that you're probably not going to find a job that you love, but you can at least find a job that you don't hate.
yeah,
And that
yeah.
should be enough.
I don't love it, but I enjoy it. I mean, there's some
Yeah.
days are better than others, and ultimately, I would like to just not work and just pursue
Yeah.
my passions and somehow make a living doing that. But you know,
Man's
I
got to
mean,
eat, right? Man's got
yeah,
to eat.
let's face it, I'm not shoveling snow outside for minimum wage in the winter in Canada. So there's definitely worse
Yeah,
jobs out there. And I
this is
mean,
true.
it's right here in my community. So the people, the customers that come in are my neighbors and stuff. So it's, you know, it's nice. So it's,
Yeah,
you know,
and a lot of your videos, you say like you notice things on your way to work. You're always like going to work or from work and
yeah, the
or back
neighborhood
home
I
again.
live in and the neighborhood that I work in, the land was formerly owned by CP Rail. So it wasn't developed until 1903 and 1905. So there's a lot of
Wow.
buildings that are of that period, you know, between 1905 and 1920 that are still around in the neighborhood that I live and work and take a different 3-story,
Yeah.
you know, commercial building or church. Sometimes it's just a 2-story brick house, but it's got arch windows and Mudflood lower windows and like really cool architectural designs on it. And it's just some house in a neighborhood, like on some residential street. So
Yeah.
those are the little things that I just love finding. So if I worked in some office tower and took the train or commuted to work or whatever, I would never see this stuff.
Mm. Yeah, it's out there though, isn't it? Just got to open your eyes
Yep. And keep
and
your
ask
peepers
some
peeled.
questions.
Keep them open.
Yeah.
Don't backslide back into the matrix, for lack of a better term.
Well, a lot of people find it easier in the Matrix. You can have a real steak. I heard.
That's right. Yeah. Especially if you get that good Alberta beef. We're famous for our beef
Yeah.
here in Alberta. So you get that Alberta beef steak. Oh, there you go. Now you're winning twice.
Yeah, it's easier in life when everything's done for you, but you got to do your own thinking. You got to do your own thinking.
Yeah, you can have people do other things for you, but you don't want to have people doing your thinking for you. You
No,
want to do
I
your
said
own
that to my
thinking.
friend last week. I said, I'm. You may be prepared to accept, prepackaged opinions, but for me, I reach my own conclusions.
Yeah, and if my conclusion happens to jive with the prepackaged narrative, then okay, fine. You know, but
Yeah,
that doesn't happen often. More and more these
yeah.
days, it seems. You know
But
that.
if it did, so be it. I'm not
Yeah, I
gonna
mean,
like change my
not
principles
not
to
every
not hurt
single.
somebody's feelings.
Well, yeah, not every single thing that we're told and every bit of information that we're provided is an outright lie. I mean, there's more truth that we're given than there's lies. It's just that the lies that we're given are much bigger.
Yeah, but it seems that
Big-
some people find just the very act of questioning things offensive. You know
Well, yeah, but you know what though? That
that
unfortunately that's their problem. So that's unfortunate for them.
exactly.
It's not your
That's
problem at
that's
all. It's
that's
their
the
problem.
correct answer, Frankie. That's what I was looking for.
You know, it's like when somebody just points at you and screeches with some accusatory tone. It's like, well, guess what? The burden of proof is not on the accusee. I don't have
Yeah,
to prove my innocence. You have to
yeah,
prove my guilt, or the burden of proof is on the accuser. You have to prove that I'm wrong. You have to
yeah,
prove that I'm guilty. I don't have to prove any innocence. There's a
yeah,
presumption of
exactly.
innocence, you know. So
Yeah,
you can point and screech all you want. That's
yeah.
doesn't
While they're
change anything.
screeching, I'll be speaking my mind. You know.
Yeah, exactly. While you're screeching, I'm going to be over here doing some research and checking out some stuff that I can see right before my very eyes.
Yeah, that's it. What else can we do? You can't just get overwhelmed by it all and just let it get to you and bog you down, and you just never get anywhere. Got to keep moving forward.
And you got to surround yourself with positive-minded people. Not necessarily. I'm
Yep.
not saying an echo chamber, but just people that are positive in the sense that these are the types of people that are positive about as much as they can be, including being receptive to different ideas. And
Yeah,
these aren't the
well, you
people that are
can't
going to
convince
point and
people
scream.
that have already made up their mind.
Yeah, yeah. So you just got to surround yourself with positivity, and the negative stuff, they can just eat themselves, you know.
Yeah, exactly. It makes life so much easier when you look at it like that. It really does. When you stop trying to fight life itself, just go with it.
You only get, what's that other old saying? You only get one chance to make a first impression. So
Yeah,
once somebody has an impression of you, it's very hard for you to change that impression. So all you can do is just stay true to who you are and keep on keeping on in the direction that you're headed. That's, affecting you positively in your life. And if that person just doesn't come around, then they just don't come around. It is what it is.
exactly. Each to their own.
And people have got to come to this thing on their own speed too, I think. It's like, if somebody had come to me 10 years ago and was waving a bunch of stuff in my face and Mudflood and a reset, and there could be some ancient tech that, that that targeted some areas of our realm, and I'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, slow down there, buddy. Like, give a guy a
Yeah,
second to catch up on what you're talking about here, fella. You know,
yeah,
you got to kind of come at it.
yeah. It's
Everybody's got
too much for some people. Like,
yeah, people got to, some
yeah,
people, everybody's got their own speed. Some people are at different spots. There's people that are way ahead of me on their awakening to this, and there's people that are still coming around, and I'm still coming around to all kinds of stuff.
yeah,
So yeah, you can just, all you can do is what's best for you in a positive way. And yeah, like you said, the people that are going to attack just because they don't hold the same viewpoint, they're just looking for a reason, because misery loves company, I guess.
yeah. They just need to grow up, to be honest.
I wish I had that much time to troll the internet just so I can get into anonymous arguments with people because I don't agree with them about random shit.
Oh,
But a guy just doesn't have
yeah,
that. There's not enough hours in a day. Come on, how do they find the time to do this?
yeah.
It boggles my mind. You could be reading something instead, or learning something, or whatever. Like, wow. But okay, you want to sit behind your keyboard and angrily smash away at it in a comment section or something. Okay, have at her, buddy. Have fun with that.
Well, that's enough for some people,
I
That's what
guess.
they did
Sure.
today. I'm happy with that.
Yeah. What'd you do today? I pissed off 6 people on the internet.
Yeah.
Well, my friend, I think I'm ready to throw in the towel here, sir.
Wrapping it up. Yeah, no worries, mate.
Yeah,
Well, hopefully we'll chat again sometime, and yeah, you'll look into the steam uh, boiler explosions. Looking
yeah,
forward to
bullet
that.
explosions. Yeah, that's very interesting.
I'm sure you'll find
I,
some interesting stuff.
I'll probably come at it through trains and get into boilers from trains. I think is probably a good route for a guy like me to
Yep.
come at it. Say, listen, thanks a lot, Oz, for coming by
No
and
worries.
chatting. It was really great chatting with you. I mean,
Yeah.
we've kind of traded comments and stuff on and off for quite a while now, but it's nice to chat one on one and get to know you a bit. And I really, really appreciate you taking time out of your day off. And
Yeah, no,
it was
that's
just it was
my
just
pleasure,
really
mate.
great to
Honestly.
get to know you. And I appreciate everything that you've done, have been doing, and continue to do behind the scenes, and all your hard work and stuff. That's
Yep.
we talked about that tonight too. Everybody's got their wheelhouse, and that's your thing. You're really great at sussing. There it is, sussing out information and research, and it's very, very valuable. So I really, really appreciate it, and I know Beeks does. He's mentioned it a lot. So yeah,
Oh, wicked.
fantastic stuff. And I know
No,
that you
no.
actually technically you do have a channel too. So yeah, I'm gonna put a link in the
Yeah,
description for
there may
your.
be one day soon. There may be some boots on the ground sort of stuff there, but for now, there's not much. But
No, we're
if
not
you
going to
want, you can
pressure
come
you.
to the the Mudflood Club on MeWe. People can come and find that. Just I'm sure Frankie will put the link there. Come join us and hang out and
Yeah, I'll put all the links.
put up your research.
Yeah, everything will be down in the description. How you can get a hold of OzBeast on his YouTube channel, and at a MeWe as well. So what else you got going on there before we let you go? Any
To be
other
honest,
special
I'm
projects
spending
you're
the
working
rest
on?
of the day. There's always something. I've got music projects. I've got like I do some programming. I've got gaming stuff that I do. But right now, I'm assembling Romans, tiny little Romans to be painted for wargaming. Many hundreds of them.
There you go. Manual dexterity
So,
and patience.
yes, it takes extreme patience.
There you go. Aha. So let's see. We've been covering a little something else here. A little something more about our friend OzBeast here. He's a patient fella. So there you go. Yeah. So you're gonna spend the rest of the day messing around with that stuff,
Maybe
are you?
next time we speak, there might be some photos.
Cool. There you go.
Yeah. Oh, for me, this is I've earned the right to do this. You know, just sit here and relax.
Everybody's got to have something that they can pour their personal efforts into, like a hobby or a passion or an interest.
Yeah.
Just that on your off time, something that just brings you sort of like some sort of, I don't know, sense of peace or calm after, the hustle and bustle of the workaday week or whatever, something that you're doing because you want to do. And it just calms you or whatever. And it's nobody's telling you to do it. Nobody's forcing you to do it. It's just something that, man, I can't wait to do this or that or the other thing.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure. All right, my friend, will you enjoy the rest of your day?
By the end of it, I'm going to have like a whole bunch of
these little
little
Roman soldiers.
I was going to say it's going to be a whole bunch of Romans. Yeah,
it's going to be an invasion. Look out. You're going to build like little Roman chariots and stuff too for
I got all the cavalry and I got all the little buildings and everything, and I've got jungles and trees and stuff already made up. And it's been years in the works coming up, to the point where it is. So this is the final sort of stages for it, getting it all ready. It's all coming together.
Man, that's cool. I can remember as a kid, my uncle had a model train set, and he made like a huge. It took up like half the basement in their house. This huge diorama with like little towns and then like a mountain area, and he had like miniature people, miniature trees. It took him years and years, and he was constantly messing around with it, tinkering, adding little buildings or more people or little cars or whatever. And it was amazing. But then he would just go down there for hours.
I love those trains.
And he'd always have this goofy look on his face.
Yeah,
he had this big smile on his face while he's doing it. And that was his thing. That was kind of his zen, I guess,
Yeah, that's his happy place.
Well, my friend, you enjoy your happy place today. And again, thank you very much for shooting in, man. I really appreciate it. It was great chatting with you, my friend. And we'll certainly be in touch. And I'd love to do this again. Anytime you've got some free time, I'd love to do it again. All right, I'll let you get to it. Thanks again, Oz.
All righty, mate. See ya.
Take care. Cheers. All right, so there he goes. That's my old friend, my old new friend. Known each other for a while, but first time chatting. OzBeast. I want to thank him once again for shooting in and joining me here tonight for this New West Chill Chat. And again, all the details of how you can get a hold of Oz in the description below. And speaking of below, let me know what you think there. If you could just kind of beep, boop, bop it. Do all the other stuff, the YouTube things. And that's going to seal the deal here today for Frankie at New West Reset. Thank you very much. Take care and have a good one. Cheers.